Liebe Freundinnen und Freunde des World Uyghur Congress, herzlich willkommen hier in Berlin, Berliner hoş geldiniz. Ich freue mich sehr, Sie heute grüßen zu dürfen und ich tue das nicht nur als Mitglied des Deutschen Bundestags, sondern als Mensch, der weiß, was es bedeutet, wenn eine Gemeinschaft um die Identität, ihre Sprache und ihre Würde kämpfen muss. Was mit dem uigurischen Volk in Xinjiang geschieht, ist keine innere Angelegenheit Chinas. Es sind systematische Unterdrückung, Masseninhaftierung, kulturelle Auslöschung. Dokumentiert, belegt und vor aller Augen der Weltgemeinschaft. Das darf uns nicht kalt lassen, das darf mich nicht kalt lassen. Deutschland und Europa tragen Verantwortung als Handelspartner, als Demokratien, als Unterzeichner der Menschenrechtskonvention. Wir müssen klar benennen, was wir sehen. Wir müssen Rechenschaft einfordern. Und wir müssen denen, die in der Diaspora ihre Stimmen erheben, zeigen, ihr seid nicht allein. Der World Uyghur Kongress leistet genau das. Er hält das Bewusstsein wach, wenn andere wegschauen wollen. Und das ist mutig, das ist notwendig und das verdient unsere volle Solidarität. Ich wünsche Ihrer Veranstaltung kraftvolle Debatten, starke Beschlüsse und die Energie, die Sie brauchen, um weiterzumachen. Mich haben Sie dabei an Ihrer Seite. Danke. Teşekkür ederim.
Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming in early today for our first session. Before we start our first panel of today, I would like to invite someone who is very dear to the Uyghur people, our community. He's been a fervent defender of Uyghur rights in the European Parliament for many years. He's helped us introduce various resolutions in the Parliament and helped vocalize our issues in the European Parliament. So it is my pleasure to welcome member of the European Parliament, Mr. İlhan Küçük.
Ladies and gentlemen, today we are not here only to discuss a war. We are here to discuss a political philosophy of power, one that seeks to redefine identity, not through consent, but through coercion. Not through citizenship, but through submission. Not through dignity, but through erasure. When a state begins to legislate ethnic unity by force, it is not building harmony. It is institutionalizing fear. When language is policed, when religion is restricted, when cultural expression is treated as a threat, when education becomes an instrument of control, then the issue is no longer public order. It is a systematic destruction of human dignity. History has taught us these lessons too many times. My own region knows the pain of forced assimilation. Bulgaria lived through the so-called revival process, revival assimilation, a brutal campaign that tried to strip Turks and Muslims of their names, their identity, their memory, and their dignity. It was not unity. It was violence dressed as state police. It was not integration. It was humiliation. It was not strengthening of the nation. It was a moral collapse of a state. And I say this not only as a politician, dear friends, but as someone whose community carries that wound in its collective memory. We know what it means when a government believes that diversity is a problem to be solved rather than a reality to be respected. We know that cost of silence. We know the price of fear. We know how easily authoritarian logic can turn identity into target. The implications of Chinese new ethnic unity law are alarming because it risks turning coercive assimilation into state doctrine, narrowing space for mother tongue education, cultural expression, and also restricting religious freedom while presenting repression as national cohesion. By codifying such measures, the law does not resolve diversity. It seeks to administrate it in a way with grave consequences for Uyghurs, Tibetans, Mongolians, and other non-Han communities. And this conversation cannot stop there, because East Turkestan, Tibet, and Taiwan are no longer isolated cases. They are interconnected front lines in the same global test for authoritarian expansion, transnational repression, and democratic resolve. The pressure on Uyghurs, Tibetans, and the people of Taiwan shows what happens when a regime believes that borders, identities, and freedoms can all be redrawn by coercion. And the international response to these cases will help determine whether rules-based order still has meaning when red lines are crossed without consequences. That is why this discussion matters far beyond on war in one country. It matters because every regime that normalizes forced assimilation sends the same dangerous signal that the state owns the people, their names, their beliefs, their language, and even their children's future. That message must be confronted without hesitation. Human rights are not Western luxury. They are not optional. They are not negotiable accessory to state power. They are the minimum standard of civilization. They exist precisely to protect the vulnerable from the power of the strong, the minority from the majority, the individual from machinery of the state. What is happening to Uyghurs, Tibetans, Mongolians, and other non-Han people should alarm the conscience of the world. Because when repression is legalized, it becomes harder to contest. When coercion is written into law, oppression acquires the language of legitimacy. And when the international community grows tired, cynical, or silent, and justice becomes more durable. This is why we must speak plainly. Stability built on fear is not stability. Development built on erasure is not development. National unity built on cohesion is not unity. It is domination. Our answer must be equally clear. Dignity is not negotiable. Cultural identity is not a threat. Religious freedom is not extremism. Language is not disloyalty. Minority rights are not concessions. They are the foundation of democratic legitimacy and social peace. If we are serious about defending human rights, when we must defend them universally, consistently, and without selective outrage. We cannot condemn some violations while excusing others because of geopolitics or economic interests. That is not principle. That is double standards. So let us stay it clear. No nation becomes stronger by humiliating its minorities. No society becomes more secure by silencing its citizens. No state becomes more legitimate by forcing people to abandon who they are. The measure of any political system is not how it treats the powerful, it is how it treats the vulnerable. And by that measure, we have a duty, a moral, a legal, and political, to stand with those who identifies are being targeted, whose freedoms are being restricted, and whose dignity is being denied. Let us be on the right side of history. Let us defend the right to be different without fear. Let us defend the right to remember, to speak, to pray, to teach, to belong, because the defense of human dignity begins where forced assimilation ends. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Xalqaro jamiyat bo'lsa charchagan, gumonsor bo'lib qolgan yoki sukut qolgan, adolat bo'lganda adolat texmi yo'qolib ketadi. Shunga biz so'zimizni ochiq va ro'shan qilishimiz kerak. qo'rqinch ustiga qurilgan muqimlik haqiqiy muqimlik emas. Assimilatsiya ustiga qurilgan taraqqiyot hargiz Asalliq millatlarninki huquqi bir xil imtiyoz yoki kelishim emas. O demokratik qonunninki va ijtimoiy tinchlikninki asosi. Bu bir prinsip emas. Bu qo'sh o'lchamdir. Shunga biz aniq pozitsiyada bo'lishimiz kerak. Hech qanday bir davlat o'zininki asalliq millatlarni xorlash orqali kuchli bo'lib qolamagan. Hech qanday bir jamiyat o'z fuqarolarini o ovozini bo'g'ish orqali texmo bexatar bo'lib qolmagan. Hech qanday bir davlat kishilarni o'z kimligidan voz kechirishga majburlash orqali texmo qonuniy va texmo haqliq bo'lib qolmagan.
More than any Dalai Lama before him, he had spent more time in exile than in his homeland. And what he did, which was remarkable and a miracle, was he transformed his exile into a force for human liberation and for world peace. That's what he did. And I think as we sit here today, so many people in exile from East Turkestan and from Tibet, as we sit here today, we should remember, something Aung San Suu Kyi said, that we should use the freedom that we have to support the freedom of people who are living today under totalitarian slavery.
Agar biz rostilla kishilik huquqni qo'g'dashga astoydil qaraydiganmiz, undaqda uni hamma yerda izchil va birdek o'lcham bilan qo'g'dashimiz kerak. Biz ba'zi huquq dafsandichiliklarni ayblab, boshqalarning geosiyosiy yoki iqtisodiy manfaatlardan sababidan oqlayolmaymiz. Bu qo'sh o'lcham shunlashqa bizning pozitsiyamiz aniq bo'lishi kerak. Hech qanday bir davlat o'zininki asalliq millatlarini xorlash orqali kuchli bo'lib qolmagan.
When the office of the Taiwan office of the Chinese regime issued a enemies list for stubborn individuals, he publicly said that he's been defending sovereignty, freedom, and dignity for Taiwan for years and years, and he wants to be added to that list. So, and I think that's the kind of offensive spirit that needs to inform all of our own actions. So, Ambassador, to begin today's panel, let me just ask you, why does China continue to claim that Taiwan has always been a part of China? Same thing it does, by the way, with Tibet. They won't talk to the Dalai Lama until he accepts their claim that Tibet has always been part of China. And I think the same is true of East Turkestan. Why do they do that, and how do we fight it?
During the early years, when I was acting as a representative of Taiwan in Germany, I used to talk about Taiwan always, together with the issue of Xinjiang, East Turkestan, and Tibet. And before I give my answer to your question, I would like to say what I always do as regard to Xinjiang, to the East Turkestan. I always ask the people, do you know what Xinjiang means in Chinese? Most of them don't. Most of them don't know what it means. I say Xinjiang means new territory. And he said, Then I say, how can China CCP claim their
Aldı bilan bugungi yig'inga qatnashgan bu mukofot qilishgan kishini tanishtirishga ruxsat qilinglar. U prinsipchan, insoniy qadr-qimmatni qo'g'dash yo'lida mustahkam turgan bir kishi. U umrining o'zini vatanida o'tkazgan vaqtidami ko'p vaqtni surgunda o'tkazgan. Ammo uningki alohida taqdirlashga arziydigan yeri shuki, u surgun hayotini, insonlarning erkinligi va dunyo tinchlik uchun xizmat qiladigan bir kuchga aylantirdi. Menimcha, bugun uning bu yerda bo'lishining sababi shu. Bugun bu yerda o'tirgan Sharq Turkiston va Tibetdan kelgan nurg'un surgunlik kishilar uchunmi biz bir narsani asda saqlashimiz kerak. U shundoq degan edi. Biz o'zimizga bo'lgan erkinlikni, bugunmi mustabid tuzumlarning qo'lliqi ostida yashayotgan kishilarning erkinligini qo'llash uchun ishlashimiz kerak. Yaqinda Xitoy hukumatining Tayvanga mas'ul organi qattiq qarshi turg'ishlar uchun bir dushmanlar tizimini e'lon qilganda, u oshkor holda bundoq dedi. Men yillardan buyon Tayvanning egilik huquqini, erkinligini va izzat hurmatini qo'llab kelyapman. Shunga meni bu tizimlikka qo'shinglar. Menimcha, dal shunday qo'rqmas va hujumchan ruh bizning barliq harakatlarimizga yetakchi bo'lishi kerak. Hamda Elchi apandi, bugun muzokaramiz xush kelibsiz. Sizdan bir savol so'ramoqchiman. Nima uchun Xitoy davomli holda Tayvan azaldan Xitoyning bir qismi bo'lib kelgan deb da'vo qildi? Xitoy Tibet masalasida o'xshash da'voni qildi. Ular Dalay Lama bilan Tibetning azaldan Xitoyning bir qismi ekanligini qabul qilmoqcha suhbat o'tkazmaydi. Menimcha, Sharq Turkiston masalasida o'xshash, Bundaqda nima uchun Xitoy bunday qildi?
Never that the Chinese people, the communists have this impression. We are afraid of them. We talked yesterday about how important it is to tell China, you should be afraid of us because you are wrong and we are right. And the only way to be strong is sitting together, stand together, just one. So again, China claims Taiwan is a part of China is because
Germaniyada men Tayvanning vakili bo'lib xizmat qilayotgan dastlabki yillardan tortib, men Tayvan masalasini doim Sharq Turkiston va Tibet masalalari bilan birlikda tilga olatdim. Savolingizga javob berishdan burun men Sharq Turkiston haqida doim qiladigan bir ishni bu yerda takrorlamoqchiman. Men odatda kishilardan bunday so'rayman. Sizlar Xinjiang degan so'zningki Xitoycha nimani bildirganligini bilamsizlar? Ko'pincha kishilar buning javobini bilmaydi. Shundan keyin men ularga bunday tushuntiraman. Xinjiang degan so'zningki ma'nosi yangidan bo'ysundirilgan yoki yangidan qo'shilgan zamin deganlik.
Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC. What are we doing? We make another definition of TSMC, and that means Taiwan stops missing China. And that's important to tell them we are dependent on our own.
Shundaq, yani dastlabda bu bir Xinjiang degan bir nomdaklar, bir ismdaklar ko'rindi. Ammo men doim buni shundaq tushuntirishga tirishaman. Bu yerda bu so'zimiz Xitoy xalqi haqida emas. Balki biz Xitoy Kommunistik partiyasi haqida so'zlayapmiz. Ba'zida shundaq bir ta'sirot paydo bo'ldiki, xuddi biz ulardan qo'rqadigandek. Biz tunugunmi bu haqda muzokara qildik. Biz Xitoyga aniq qilib shuni deyishimiz nihoyatda muhim. Sizlar bizni qo'rqishingiz kerak. Chunki sizlar xato tarafda, biz bo'lsak to'g'ri tarafda turamiz. Mana bu haqiqiy kuchlik bo'lishningki birdan bir yo'li.
I'm not telling people here in Brussels, no matter who I met, I said, one China policy is outdated. You should say one China policy and not one China policy. Because if you said one China policy, of course there's difference between the one China principle and the one China policy. One China principle, that's what China says, and it's so confusing for the people. One China principle means there is only one China in the world, and Taiwan is a part of the China, and this China is the People's Republic of China. That's one China principle. One China policy means there is one China in the world, and EU, Germany, they recognize this China, People's Republic of China. as legitimate government in China.
Daiman bu so'zni tushunish tirishimi bu yerda biz ta'kidlab qo'yganimiz biz Xitoy haqida, Xitoy xalqi haqida so'zlamayapmiz, balki biz Xitoy Kommunistik partiyasi haqida so'zlayapmiz. Ba'zi kishilarda xuddi biz ulardan Xitoy Kommunistik partiyasidan qo'rqadigandek bir taassurot paydo bo'ldi. Biz tunigimi buning qanchalik muhim ekanligi haqida so'zlashgan.
So when you talk about cooperation with Taiwan as regard to technology, as regard to AI, to semiconductor, what has that to do with one China policy? So I have been telling them it is outdated. Taiwan, but this small Taiwan is so important, so significant for the security, for the future of
Amaliyotda biz shunday deyishimiz kerakki, sizlar bizdan qo'rqishinglar kerak Xitoy Kommunistik partiyasi. Chunki sizlar xato tarafda, biz bo'lsak to'g'ri tarafda turibmiz. Haqiqiy kuchli bo'lishning birdan-bir yo'li birlikda turishimizdir. Men yana bir nuqtani aytay. Xitoy Tayvanni Xitoyning bir qismi deb da'vo qildi. Ammo men buningga boshqa chiqarayman. Hammamizga ma'lum bo'lgandek, Tayvan dunyodagi eng muhim yerim o'tkazgich, ya'ni semiconductor shirkatlarininki biri bo'lgan TSMC'ninki makoni. Biz ba'zida TSMC'ning ma'nosini chaqchaq qilib, men ba'zida TSMC'ninki ma'nosini chaqchaq qilib mundaq izohlayman. Yani Taiwan stops missing China. Taiwan Xitoyga tabi bo'lishni rad qildi, yoki Taiwan Xitoyning bir qismi emas degan shunday ma'noda deb izohlayman. Bu yani biz Xitoyga yetkazishga tegishli bo'lgan nihoyat muhim bir uchur. Biz o'zimizningki aloqa munosabatlarimizga, o'zimizningki qimmat qarashlarimizga va o'zimizning kuchiga tayinishimiz kerak.
Here in Indo-Pacific, a very important maneuver was held again. That was the Barikatan maneuver with 7 countries. And for the first time, Japan is there and Philippines is there. Barikatan means shoulder to shoulder.
Meningcha biz Xitoy Kommunistik partiyasi tarqatgan tashviqotlarning ta'siriga bak ko'p uchradik. Yani bu masalani tushuntirganda men doim mundaq deyman. Birinchidan, bir Xitoy siyosati vaqti o'tgan bir siyosat. Shuningdek biz bu haqda so'zlaganda nihoyat ehtiyotchan bo'lishimiz kerak. Chunki bir Xitoy prinsipi bilan bir Xitoy siyosatining orasida zo'r farq bor. Yani bir Xitoy prinsipi degan bu Xitoy o'zi so'zlaydigan, o'zi tashviq qiladigan bir qarash. Xitoyning qarashicha dunyoda faqat bir Xitoy bor. Tayvan bo'lsa, shu Xitoyning ayrilmas bir qismi.
And we're very honored to have both of them here. And Pempa, we're at a critical moment today. His Holiness next month will turn 91. And he has raised the issue of reincarnation. And here you have an atheistic communist regime that is threatening to take over the religious process and practice of reincarnation. What does that mean? I mean, the cynicism, there's a Yiddish word for it, chutzpah, of a government, an atheistic government to try to take over this fundamental religious practice is threatening, I think, not only to Tibet but to others. Why don't you talk a little about that and what you see happening?
Bir Xitoy siyosati deganlik dunyoda faqat bir Xitoy bor. Yevropa ittifoqi va Germaniya bo'lsa Xitoy Xalq Jumhuriyatini rasmiy e'tirof qildi degan ma'noni bildirdi. Ammo buning Tayvan bilan bo'lgan iqtisodiy, texnikalik va boshqa sohalardagi hamkorliklarni cheklaydiganligini darak bermaydi. Bugungi kunda sun'iy aql, yerim o'tkazgich va yuqori texnik sohalarda Tayvanning roli intayin muhim. Bundaqda buning bir Xitoy siyosati bilan munosabati bor. Men doim shuni ta'kidlayman, bu siyosat vaqti o'tgan bir qarash bo'lib qoldi. Chunki Tayvan bugun dunyo bexatarligi, kelgusi texnika taraqqiyoti va xalqaro iqtisodning muqimligi uchun intayin muhim bo'lib turibdi. Shunga biz Tayvan bilan bo'lgan hamkorligimizni texnik kuchaytirishimiz kerak. Biz Tayvan bilan yerim o'tkazgich yuqori texnika va boshqa strategik sohalarda yaqindan hamkorlashishimiz kerak. Men ilgari yana chaqchaq qilib mundaq aytdim, yana TSMC deganning ma'nosi Tayvan yerim o'tkazgich yasash shirkati emas, balki Tayvan Xitoyga tabiiy qildi degan aytdim. Albatta bu chaqchaq, ammo bu chaqchaqning orqasida buning siyosiy ma'nosi aniq. Tayvan o'zining yo'lini tanlagan, u o'zining demokratiyasini, erkinlikni va kelgusini o'zi belgilaydi. Bugun biz bu jihatda yolg'iz emas. Yaponiya va boshqa nurg'un sherik davlatlarmi bu masalada Tayvan bilan bir safda. Allohga rahmat.
Method of choosing the next reincarnation. So we were not even sure. Sometimes His Holiness says that I could be the last Dalai Lama. So Tibetan people, all the Buddhists around the world wrote to His Holiness to continue the lineage.
Bugün biz üçün intayin şərəflik bir iş ki, bu sahədəki iki mühim şəxs biz bilan birgə oturubdu. Biz həqiqətən halqılıq bir dövrdə turuyatımız. Canabi Dalai Lama cənabları kilar ayda 91 yaşa kirdi. Bu yaxında qayta tug'ilish masalasini tilga oldi. Shundan bir vaqtda biz bir ateist, kommunist hokimiyatning dal shu diniy jarayonni o'z kontroliga ilishga urinayotganligini ko'ryapmiz. Buning ma'nosi nima? Bir ateist hukumatning qayta tug'ilishga o'xshash eng muqaddas diniy aqidalar va diniy jarayonlarni kontrol qilishga urinishdagi masxara va ziddiyatlarni o'ylab boqinglar. Menimcha bu faqat Tibet uchun emas, balki boshqa nurg'un diniy va milliy jamiyatlar uchunmi ig'ir tahdid hisoblanadi. Bu vaqtda azroq to'xtalib, biz siz ko'rayotgan vaziyatni biz bilan fikrlaringizni o'rtoqlashsangiz.
Tell the world that they have respect of the Tibetans to the Chinese pension. In fact, Tibetans inside Tibet have even Tibetans who are communist members, they are not normally allowed to visit monasteries. But during these times, when Chinese pension comes, they are forced to listen to his Kala Chakra teachings, just to show the numbers. So he would be definitely used by the Chinese government to look for the next reincarnation, that is Chinese plan of how they want to do. So they have three positions. One is that the Dalai Lama, they will look for His Holiness reincarnation within China. So an atheist government that does not believe any religion wants to order the Dalai Lama not to be reborn outside Tibet or China. So the whole concept of reincarnation is the person that is supposed to have the divine power to decide where he or she would be born in his or her next life. So this goes against the idea of reincarnation. And then the second position of the Chinese government is that on His Holiness response to the first position is very clear.
İkinciden ben qayta şunu teklemenki bu mesele nayeti mühim. Bazı
in Tibet or China. So that is very clear. And the second position of the Chinese government is that traditionally they have to use
bazı vaxtlarda mukaddes zati alileri Dalai Lama özlerinin en ahirki Dalai Lama bulup kelishi mümkünlüğünü tilga aldı. Ama Tibet halkı ve dünyadaki milyonlagan Budistlar mukaddes zati alilerinin bu mukaddes nesep ve ananeniki davamlaşışını ümit kıldı. Bu meselede karar çıkarış hukuki Tibet Budizmning dini ananasiga tava. Ama Xitoy Kommunistik Partiyasi bu jarayonni kontrol qilishga urinayotidir. Bu nihoyatda g'alati bir ahvol. Chunki Ateist hokimiyat diniy rahbarning qayta tug'ilishini belgilashga urinayotidir. Ular diniy e'tiqodni kontrol qilishni xohlaydi. Ama bununla qaramay
and he looked through the Yuan dynasty.
Tibet xalqining Dalai Lamaga bo'lgan hurmati va sadoqati o'zgarmadi. Amaliyotda Tibet ichidagi nurg'un tibetliklar, hatto kommunist partiya a'zolari bo'lgan tibetliklarmi odatda
have never considered Tibet as part of China, and that coming from a Chinese
monastirlarni ziyorat qilishga ruxsat qilinmaydi.
imperial Chinese historical records.
Bu yerdagi nuqta shuki, so'zligichi Xitoy Kommunistik partiyasi
After the imperial times, after 1911, then it should have been printed before 1949, or if it's a reprint, it should have been reprinted by the Communist Party of China. So the evidence is irrefutable. And Michael is also here. He has done a research on Tibetan history from an international legal perspective, and he's doing one for the Uyghurs also. Now we have to see how we can work together, because every country's background is different, but then the essence is the same, that we have the legitimate right to seek freedom for our people. So so we now found that there is no document on this golden urn. So we are going to hold a history conference this year on Tibet, not just Tibet, but the whole region in that area. And Professor Lau is very clear in his book. He has written 3 chapters on the golden urn. There is no evidence either from the Chinese side or the Tibetan side on the golden urn. And the third position is that
Ammo Xitoy amaldorlari Tibetni ziyorat qilgan vaqtlarda kishilar majburiy holda Dalay Lamaning diniy ta'limotlarini emas, balki Xitoy hukumatining siyosiy tashviqotlarini anglashga majburlandi. Mana shuningdan Tibet xalqining haqiqiy e'tiqodi va Xitoy hukumatining pozitsiyasi o'rtasidagi farqni ko'ra olamiz. Xitoy hukumatining planiga oid aniq. Ular keyingi Dalay Lamani o'zlari bekitmoqchi. Xitoyning bu masaladagi birinchi pozitsiyasi shuki, keyingi Dalay Lamaning qayta tug'ilishi cho'qim Xitoy doirasi ichida, yana Tibet yoki Xitoy tavallugidagi rayonda bo'lishi kerak. Demak, hech qanday diniy e'tiqodga ishonmaydigan bir ateist hukumat Dalay Lamaga sen Tibet yoki Xitoy sirtida qayta tug'ilmasliging kerak deb buyruq qilmoqchi bo'lyotdi. Holbuki qayta tug'ilish ideyasining o'ziga asoslanganda qayta tug'ilg'uchi ruhning keyingi hayotida qayerda tug'ilishni o'zi tanlaydigan ruhiy qudrati bo'lishi kerak. Shunga bu qayta tug'ilish hukumining Xitoy hukumatining buni qarashi qilmoqchi bo'lgani qayta tug'ilish hukumatining eng asosiy ma'nosiga zid keldi. Dalay Lama aliylarining bunga bergan javobi intayin aniq. Undaq deydi: agar qayta tug'ilish ideyasiga ishonmasanglar, undaqda qayta tug'ilish masalasiga aralashishga hech qanday haqqinglar yo'q. Xitoyningki bu masaladagi yana bir pozitsiyasi bo'lsa, Xitoy yani o'z tarixdagi Dalay Lamalarning bekitish jarayonini o'z manfaatiga mos holda tushuntirib, o'zininki shu bu ishga aralashishini aqlashga urinadi.
So we will be working with other countries to see, because we have very limited time, 1 hour, so I just want to focus a little more on what we need to do. Now, on 1st July, I think all Uyghurs, all Tibetans, all Mongols should come together and protest everywhere in this world. And they should write to every government about what this ethnic unity and progress law means for us. So this is the first step we need to take. And I think we need to strategize more, because you do your own things, we do our own things. Of course, we need to do our own things. But there are certain things that we need to do together. And we need to study the situation of China in different scenarios, including status quo, and see what are the opportunities and challenges for Taiwanese, for Tibetans, for Uyghurs, for Mongols, for Hong Kongers, and for pro-democracy dissidents around the world. So now we have to show the Chinese government that if necessary, we all can come together. And we have to understand the larger objective first, and then our own objectives should become secondary. If there is no solution to that, there cannot be a secondary solution to anybody. So So I think we have to now be more
Endi biz Xitoyninki mushaqdagi da'volarni tekshirib ko'rsak, tarixiy faktlarninki ularning bu da'volarini qo'llamaydiganligini bayqaymiz. 1949-yildan burun nashr qilingan nurg'un materiallarni ko'rsak, agar Xitoy qayta nashr qilingan bo'lsa, ular cho'qim Xitoy Kommunistik partiyasining tahriri va kontrolligidan o'tgan bo'ldi. Shunga bar bo'lgan dalillar aniq, inkor qilib bo'lmaydi. Michael bugun bu yerda bor. U Tibet tarixini xalqaro qonun nuqtasidan cho'nqur tadqiq qilgan. Hozir bo'lsa Uyg'urlarga munosabatlik o'xshash tadqiqotni olib boryapti. Endi biz qanday hamkorlasha oladiganligimiz haqida o'ylashimiz kerak. Chunki har bir xalqning tarixiy arx ko'rinishi va ahvoli o'xshamaydi. Ammo eng muhim nuqta o'xshash. Xalqimizning erkinligini talab qilish va qo'g'dash bizning qonuniy va haqli huquqimizdir. Endi Xitoy hukumatining yana bir 3-chi pozitsiyasiga kelsak, biz hozir oltin quta deb atiladigan bir sistema haqida izlanish olib bordik. Bu yil Tibet va shu Tibetning tarixiga bag'ishlangan bir ilmiy muhokama yig'ini o'tkazmoqchi. Professor Lau o'zining kitobida bu masalani aniq bayon qilgan. U oltin quta haqida 3 bob yozib, bu sistemaning Dalay Lamalarni tanlash jarayonida haqiqiy rol o'ynaydiganligini isbotlaydigan ishonchlik dalilning na Xitoy manbalarida, na Tibet manbalarida mavjud emasligini ko'rsatgan.
People around the world about this issue.
Thank you so much, Carol. Good morning, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. So what's happening today to the Uyghur people seems like it's not dominating the headlines, but the genocide is still very much ongoing. And it escalated and also evolved to a different part.
Bizning vaqtimiz nihoyat cheklik. Shundan 1-iyul kuni nima qilishimiz kerakligiga ozroq diqqat bermoqchiman. Meningcha barliq Uyg'urlar, barliq Tibetliklar va barliq Mo'ng'ullar birlikda harakat qilish kerak. Dunyoning har qaysi joylarida birlikda namoyish qilishimiz kerak. Biz har qaysi davlat hukumatlariga Millatlar Ittifoqligi va Taraqqiyot qonunining nima uchun biz uchun nimadan darak beradiganligini tushuntirishimiz kerak. Bu biz tashlashimiz kerak bo'lgan birinchi qadamdir. Andan keyin biz texmi yaxshi strategiya tuzishimiz kerak. Sizlar o'zingizlarning ishlarini qilasizlar, biz o'z ishlarimizni qilamiz. Albatta, har birimiz o'zimizning masalalar uchun xizmat qilishimiz kerak. Ammo ba'zi ishlar borki, biz ularni cho'qim birlikda qilishimiz kerak. Biz Xitoyning navbatdagi vaziyatini va har xil mumkin bo'lgan ssenariylarni tadqiq qilishimiz kerak. Hozirgi vaziyatning davomlashishini o'z ichiga olgan holda qanday fursatlar va qanday xiraslar borligini ko'rib chiqishimiz kerak. Bu Tayvanliklar uchunmi, Tibetliklar uchunmi, Uyg'urlar uchunmi, Mo'ng'ullar uchunmi, Hong Kongliklar uchunmi va dunyodagi demokratiyani qo'llaydigan barliq kuchlar uchunmi muhimdir. Biz bugun Xitoy hokimiyatiga shuni ko'rsatishimiz kerak. Agar zarur bo'lsa, biz hammamiz birlikda harakat qila olamiz. Biz oldi bilan o'rtoq va taxmin cho'ng nishonni tushunishimiz kerak. Ondan keyin o'zimizning ayrim nishonlari keyin o'rniga tushadi. Chunki agar asosiy masala hal qilinmasa, boshqa hech qanday masalaning hal qilinishi mumkin emas. Shunga meningcha biz hozirdan boshlab texmi ko'p moslashib, texmi yaxshi hamkorlashishimiz kerak.
In Washington at the Hill, we used to have room full of Uyghurs coming and sitting with pictures of their missing family members. Now we see only few. The reason for that is our family members back home are threatened if they speak out. Basically, the Chinese government is using the most important part of human connections, like the love you have for your family. And the Chinese government is weaponizing that against the Uyghurs and diaspora as China's transnational repression. And for me, China's transnational repression has a name, face, and a story. Dr. Gulshan Abbas. It has been a difficult day for me. Hardly slept any since midnight.
Xeyli kişiler, qarindoshlar,
Today is my
bugun
sister's
Uyg'ur xalqiga
64th birthday.
yuz berayotgan ishlar garchi xabarlarning bosh sahifalarning
that she's
ilgirliklar
spending
egilmayotgan
in China
bo'lsa-mu,
jail.
ammo irq qirg'inchilik hozirmi davomlashyotdi. U to'xtab qolgani yo'q.
Anyone ever
Aksincha, u
visited
texmi
Hong Kong
keskinlashdi.
past 8 years?
Shuning bilan birga u yangi shakllarga o'zgardi. Bugun biz ko'rayotgan vaziyat ilgarigidan farqli bir bosqichga kirib bo'ldi.
As an Uyghur American,
Baxtga qarshi nurg'un kishilar bu o'zgarishning cho'nqurligi va eg'irligini texi to'liq tushunib yetmadi.
September 2018, when this mass detention first started, talking about China's genocidal policies, talking about what China is doing to the diaspora Uyghurs, and outlining the fate of my in-laws. My husband, Abdul Hakim Idris, he's here with us, and he also leads another organization, Center for Uyghur Studies. 24 members of his family went missing. My parents-in-laws, all of his siblings and their spouses, and 14 of his nieces and the nephews. And then when I talked about that, they took my own sister, a retired medical doctor, not an outspoken or political person, just living ordinary life. And the Chinese government did that to silence me. Yet, I transformed myself from being a professional businesswoman, leading international business development, being a director for international business development work for a firm in Washington, D.C. I became a full-time activist because I wanted to show them that it's not going to work. Because it's not only the Uyghurs' future is at stake anymore. It's about the freedom and the democracy of the world. All this mass surveillance and the ethnic assimilations and forced sterilizations and taking the children away to the boarding schools started in Tibet and then expanded, perfected, escalated to genocide in my homeland, East Turkestan. And then China used that to demolish the democracy in the world, in Hong Kong, demolish the democracy in the front of the world's eyes, and no one did a thing. They just sat and watched. What happened to Hong Kong today? It became just like Beijing, Tibet, or East Turkestan. And now China is threatening Taiwan with same tactics. And Taiwan is being next if we sit still again. And then it will be all of us, the entire world, because China's goal is not just controlling the territories they already occupied or claiming to taking Taiwan back. No, they are not going to stop there. Their goal is taking over the world. They are looking at, carefully studying all the atrocities in the past. Chi Haotian, one of the Chinese military officials, said, actually, during the World War II, he said, Nazi Germany and the Imperial Japan lost, and he said lost, after millions of people were killed during the Holocaust. But Chi Haotian said they lost because they had too many war fronts at the same time. And he continued saying that we need to take those as lessons learned. We need to deal with one by one. We have to have one war each at the time. So now they feel like they are dealing with West, US, or the Western democratic countries. Why are they taking the global South and the Muslim majority countries behind their back? But they're next. They're coming too. So we have to wake up, not only for the marginalized groups within China's borders, but we have to wake up for everything that the people in this world worked so hard to establish. They sacrificed their lives for the last 70 years. And that is being at stake, and that's being threatened. So we, everyone, all of us here, are responsible for what happens next. It's on our hand to leave the world to our children, our next generations. Not like the Uyghurs today's situation, or Tibetans, or how the Taiwanese people living in the fear, or what happened in Hong Kong, but live like the world
Dövlət alqıgan bastırış siyasətinin bir qismi var idi. Bir çirayi və bir hekayəsi var idi. Bu məsələ mənim üçün intayın şəxsi məsələdir. Kən köləmlik tutqun qilish hərəkətləri tuncu qatdan başlanğan vaxtlarda mən Xitayның eriq qırğıçlıq siyasəti haqida söyləyətqandım. Mən Xitayningki diasporadakı Uyğurlarga nima qilayotganligini bayon qilayotgandim. Şu vaqtlarda mening qiynatam yo'ldashimningki oilasi duch kelgan fojiani so'zlab berdim. Yo'ldashim bugun bu yerda biz bilan birga Uyg'ur tadqiqot markazining qurg'uvchilarining biri, uning oilasidan 24 kishi izdireksiz yo'qolib ketdi. Qiynapman va barliq tuqqanlarim yo'qolib ketganlar qatorida edi. Men bu vaqtda oshkora so'zlagan vaqtimda Xitoy hukumati mening o'z singlimni olib ketdi. O'z adamimni olib ketdi. U pensiyaga chiqqan bir doktor edi. U hech qanday bir siyosiy faoliyatchi emas. U faqat bir oddiy bir hayot kechirayotgan bir ayol edi. Xitoy hukumatining buni faqat mening ovozimni jimjit qilish uchun qildi deb qarayman. Ammo ular maqsadiga yetolmadi. Aksicha men o'zgardim. Ben Xelqara Sovet Taraqqiyot sohasida xizmat qilayotgan bir kasbiy xodim edim. Washingtondagi bir organda Xelqara Sovet Taraqqiyot ishlariga mas'ul rahbarlik vazifasini o'tayotgan edim. Ammo keyin men butun vaqtimni atagan bir faoliyatchiga aylandim. Chunki men ularga bir narsani demoqchi edim. Bu ishlar qilayotgan bu ishinglar unum bermaydi. Chunki bugun masala faqat Uyg'urlarning kelgusiga munosabatlik emas. Bu masala dunyoning erkinligi, demokratiyasi kelgusiga munosabatlik bir masala. Bugun ko'rayotgan keng ko'lamdagi nazorat sistemasi, majburiy assimilyatsiya va bostirish siyosatlari hammaga ayon.
So it's extremely serious. Our final speaker is Suni Cheng, who is the vice president of the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy. I just want to note, Suni, when I was in Taiwan a couple of weeks ago, I pointed out that I went to Taiwan for the first time in 1994, and I was obsessed with an idea, because we, the NED, National Endowment for Democracy, were very small and we were struggling at the time. We had no money. And the question was, well, how do we do more with less? So I had this crazy idea that the way we do more with less is by getting other countries.
Bu keng ko'lamli nazorat sistemlari, milliy assimilyatsiya siyosatlari, majburiy singdirish harakatlari va bolalarni
Taiwan should create a democracy foundation.
atlardan ayırıp yataqlıq məktəblərə yollaş siyasəti əslində Tibetdə başlanğan. Ondan bu siyasət kengaydi, texnik mükəmməlləşdirildi. Axırda mənim vətənim Şərq Türkistanda eriq qırğınçılıq dərəcəsinə yetkizildi. Keyin Xitay bu təcrübələrini işlətib Hong Kongdakı demokratiyani vayron qildi. Ular dünyanın göz aldida Hong Kongdakı demokratiyani yo'q qildi. Ammo hech kim əməli hərəkət qilmadi. Köpünçə faqat qarab turdi. Nurg'un kishilar faqat qarab turdi. Bugun Hong Kongning qanday bo'lganligini ko'ryapmiz. U xuddi Beijingda, Tibet yoki Sharq Turkistonda o'xshash bir holatga tushib qoldi. Hozir
the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy was created, and I think, and I hope you agree, Ambassador, that it's been a very successful initiative for Taiwan. And maybe you could sort of
u xuddi Beijing va Tibet yoki Sharq Turkistonda o'xshash bir holatga tushib qoldi. Hozir Xitoy Tayvanga tahdid solmoqda. Ular o'xshash taktikalarni qo'llanadi. Agar yana biz sukut qilib o'tirsak, keyingi qatim bu faqat Tayvan bilan cheklanib qolmaydi. U hammamizga ta'sir ko'rsatadi. Chunki Xitoyning nishoni faqat ishg'ol qilgan zimlarni kontrol qilish yoki Tayvanni qo'lga keltirish emas. Ular bu yerda to'xtab qolmaydi. Ularning oxirgi nishoni dunyo tartibiga ta'sir ko'rsatish, dunyo miqyosida hukmronlik kuchiga aylanishdir. Ular o'tmishdagi barliq zulm va vahshiyliklarni astoydil tadqiq qilyapti. Biz Xitoy harbiy amaldorining so'zini men eslayman. U Ikkinchi dunyo urushi haqida to'xtalib, Natsiz Germaniya bilan imperiyalik Yaponning mag'lub bo'lganligini tilga oldi. Ularning deyishicha, ular millionlab odamning o'limiga sabab bo'lgan bo'lsa-mu, mag'lub bo'lish sababi bu emas ekan. Uning qarashicha, ular mag'lub bo'lishining sababi bir vaqtda bek urush sipi ochqanlik ekan. Ondan u mundaq degan: biz bundan dars olishimiz kerak. Biz har qatimda bir nishon bilan shug'ullanishimiz kerak. Bugun ular G'arb dunyosi, Amerika va demokratik davlatlar bilan shug'ullanayotgandek ko'rindi. Ammo ular shuning bilan bir vaqtda Janubiy dunyo davlatlari va har qaysi musulmon ko'p sonli davlatlarga ta'sir ko'rsatdi. Ularmi keyingi nishon bo'ldi. Shunga biz uyg'onishimiz kerak. Bu faqat Xitoy chegara ishidagi bostirilgan millatlar uchun emas. Biz bu dunyodagi xalqlarning yaqinqi 70 yil ichida qanchalik qurbonlik va tirikchilik bilan qurib chiqqan qimmat qarashlari uchun uyg'onishimiz kerak. Bugun bularning hammasi xavf ostida turmoqda. Shunga keyin nima ish yuz berganligi uchun hammamiz mas'uliyatchan bo'lishimiz kerak. Bu bizning qo'limizda. Biz keyingi avlodlarimizga qanday dunyo qoldirganligimizni belgilayapmiz. Biz ularga bugungi Uyg'urlar duch kelgan yoki Tibetlar boshdan kechirayotgan yoki Tayvan xalqi qo'rqinch yashayotgan yoki Hong Kong yuz bergan ahvollarga o'xshash bir dunyoni avlodlarimizga qoldirmasligimiz lozim. Biz bularni asdan chiqarmasligimiz kerak. Chunki bugun bu yerda dal shu vaqt chunki bugun biz hammamiz dal mushaq so'zlayapmiz.
So that's about Taiwan Foundation for Democracy, and we're a proud partner of the NED. And we hope to continue our endeavors together. And thank you for this. And about the misinformation or the manipulation of information, I would categorize the CCP's strategy and tactics into three. One is about information manipulation. And I call it a cognitive warfare. It's a psychological strategy designed to change the way Taiwanese citizens perceive reality or process information. And it is aimed to create distrust and spark defeatism, break public will to resist external pressure from China. And there is also disinformation, misinformation, FEMI, exploiting Taiwan's open society and freedom of expression to produce or automate with robots fake or manipulated heavily biased information to maneuver the public perception and public opinion into pressuring the governments into taking initiatives that are in favor of Chinese CCP's goals. And the second
bir necha yil ilgari men Tayvanda bo'lgan vaqtimda men bir ishni eslab o'tgandim. Hozir so'zlayotgan kishi Tayvan Demokratiya fondining muavin raisi Shitni Ching deydi. Bu yerda deydi endi. Men bir necha yil ilgari Tayvanda bo'lgan vaqtimda men bir ishni eslab o'tdim. Men Tayvanga tunji qatim 1994-yilda borgan. Shu vaqtda men bir o'yga bak qiziqib qoldim. Chunki biz Nöwetlik Demokratiya fondida ishlayotgandik. O vaqtda biz nəhayət kiçik bir orqanlıq, məbləğimiz nəhayət az idi. Şuna biz daim bir sual üstündə oynatdıq. Qandaq qılıb biz az mənbə bilən texmi köp işni vücudqa çıxara alayımız. Şu çağda mənim qələtə bir oyun var idi. O bolsunmu demokratiyani qollaş xizmətində başqa dövlətlərinin öz fondi və öz qollaş mexanizmlərini quruşqa ilhamlandırıcı idi. Keyin 2003-yilda Tayvanda Demokratiya fondi qurildi. Menimcha hamda sizning qo'shilishingizni umid qilamanki, bu Tayvan uchun nihoyatda muvaffaqiyatli bir tashabbus bo'ldi. Bu Tayvanning demokratiya, kishilik huquq va erkinlik qimmat qarashlari larni xalqaro shaklda ilgari surishga zo'r to'p qo'shdi.
Some of them disappear during their trip to China, and their whereabouts is still unknown. And other methods include weaponizing legal framework internationally and towards Taiwan to threaten business people, academics, with severe retaliation, including retaliation of our ambassador here, claiming that they would, threaten the life of certain people or their family members. And the other method is squeezing the freedom of expression globally by forbidding or pressuring politicians or business leaders, civic group leaders into mentioning Taiwan or attending any activities that's related to Taiwan.
Tayvan Demokratiya Fondi haqida qisqa to'xtalsam, biz Nöwetlik Demokratiya Fondining faxrlik hamkorlaridan birimiz. Biz bu hamkorlikni kelgusida davom ettirishni umid qilamiz. Bu biz uchun bu fursat uchun rahmat. Uchur burmalash va uchurni kontrol qilish masalasiga kelsak, menimcha Xitoy Kommunistik Partiyasining strategiyasi va taktikalarni cho'ng turga ayirishga bo'ldi. Birinchisi, uchurni kontrol qilish va fikrga ta'sir ko'rsatish. Men buni tunish jangi deb atayman. Hech qilish jangi deb atayman. Bu bir psixologik strategiya bo'lib, kishilarning reallikni qanday ko'rishni va uchurlarni qanday qabul qilishni o'zgartirishni maqsad qildi. Uning maqsadi jamiyatimizda ishonchsizlik paydo qilish, umidsizlik, mag'lubiyat tuyg'usi uchun shundaqla kishilarning Xitoyning tashqi bosimga qarshi turish irodasini ojizlashtirishdan iborat. Buning bilan bir vaqtda ular yolg'on uchur tarqatdi. Ular Tayvanning ochiq jamiyati va fikr erkinligidan foydalandi. Bot hisoblar, avtomatik sistemlar orqali yolg'on, saxta yoki qattiq bir taraflama uchurlarni keng ko'lamda tarqatdi. Ularning maqsadi jamoat fikrini o'zgartirish, xalqning hukumatga bo'lgan besimini Xitoy Kommunistik Partiyasining manfaatiga mos kelgan yo'nalishga burashdan iborat. Ya'ni hukumatlarni Beijingning nishonlariga foydali bo'lgan siyosatlarni qo'llanishga ittirish.
And for this, I remain ever hopeful, and I echo Sikyung's appeal that apart from getting together and talk and discuss and show our concern, we also need to work out a strategy, doing more than just conferences. We need to work out a strategy on how we lobby, on how we play different roles.
Odatda fuqarolarmi Xitoyga borgan safarlar jarayonida g'oyib bo'lib ketgan ahvollar yuz berdi. Bularning ba'zilarining taqdiri hozircha noma'lum. Xitoy hukumati qo'llanayotgan boshqa usullarning biri qonuniy ramkalarni qurolga aylantirish. Ular xalqaro saviyada qonun va siyosiy mexanizmlarni ishlatib, Tayvanni qo'llaydigan savdogarlarga, akademiklarga va boshqa shaxslarga besim ishlatadi. Ular og'ir o'ch ilish va jazolash tahdidini qo'llandi. Buning ichida bizning bu yerdagi elchimizga qaratilgan tahdidlar bor. Ba'zi ahvollarda ular ma'lum shaxslarning o'ziga yoki oila a'zolariga ziyon yetkazish bilan tahdid solgan. Yana bir muhim usul bo'lsa, dunyo miqyosida fikr bayon qilish erkinlikni taraytish. Ular siyosatchilarga, savdo rahbarlariga va fuqarolar jamiyati tashkilotlarining yetakchilariga besim ishlatib, Tayvanni tilga olmaslikka yoki Tayvanga munosabatlik faoliyatlarga qatnashmaslikka majburlaydi. Ularning maqsadi shuki, Tayvan haqidagi suhbatni qo'llashni va xalqaro aloqani kontrol qilish va cheklashdir.
Yes, in 2012, which was where they drafted something called document number 9, that I think everyone here probably is familiar with. But what document number 9 said, that we have to intensify our struggle against certain concepts. And those concepts included constitutional government, civil society, free media, the rule of law, and universal values. Imagine that. This is what they have to intensify their struggle against. And they are inherently insecure. And I think Taiwan makes them even more insecure because Xi Jinping has the view that China is a Chinese-speaking Confucian society which are inherently authoritarian. And somehow democracy is a Western idea that doesn't fit well with Asian countries. And I think what Taiwan represents and will represent this to the Chinese people is a Chinese-speaking society with a Confucian culture which is a democratic country representing universal human values. And that's what we all represent. And that, I think, is the fundamental basis for what has to be the struggle against Chinese totalitarianism. And I think that what we've heard this morning really is the beginning of a process which we have to intensify, of thinking through strategically how to increase the
CCP in this case, Chinese communists panic because they are afraid of us when we are together.
We're not going on break, so everyone remain in the room.
Greetings from a very hot England, and I'm very sorry I can't be with you at the International Uyghur Forum in Berlin. Greetings from a very hot England, and I'm very sorry I can't be with you at the International Uyghur Forum in Berlin this year. But I'm very pleased to give you a message of support, not simply from myself, but from many people in the UK who stand with the Uyghurs and the Tibetans for basic human rights within the area controlled by China. It's a very difficult time. We've got an American president who is completely unpredictable and has lost interest in some of the issues Americans have taken seriously before, including human rights. And we've got Vladimir Putin in Russia behaving in a disgraceful way, psychopathic way almost, which means the Chinese government actually, for the first time, looks the most stable of the three regimes. And while they aren't more stable internationally, they are not more stable internally, where they are determined to roll out the integration of all minorities into a so-called Han regime, a Hanification of China, so that basic human rights, basic right to worship your religion of your choice, basic right to carry on with your traditions is being eradicated in a most disgraceful way. So that being the case, it's very important those of us who understand what's going on stand up for the Uyghurs, stand up for the Tibetans, and stand up for human rights everywhere. I'm delighted you're having your forum in Berlin. I wish you all the best success, and remember you always have friends in Britain.
Thank you. Now it is my pleasure to invite Mr. Yves-François Blanchet for his keynote speech. And
everyone, I heard yesterday, and again a few minutes ago, this idea of working in a more
Tayvanның
strategic
mavjudligi
way.
ularni texim bayram qildi. Chunki Xi Jinpingning qarshida Tayvan Xitoy Kommunistik partiyasining siyosiy bayonlariga mos kelmaydigan
And friends and nations
mos kelmaydigan
suffer.
bir ulga bo'lib
And there
qoldi.
are some
Bugun atigan anglagan so'zlarning hammasi meningcha bir
whose
bosqichning
nations
boshlanishi.
and
Biz
family
bundan keyin texmo strategiyalik o'ylanishimiz kerak.
at least
Biz
not
qanday
the
qilib
way
Xitoy Kommunistik partiyasiga bo'lgan
European
besimni
people do.
ochirlaydiganligimizni o'ylashimiz
But
kerak.
into
Chunki
those
biz birlashganda
strategies
ular
that
bizdan
are
qo'rqadi.
to be built.
Endi
Take
biz
into
aramoqchimiz.
account the fact that you have allies, friends, which are determined to be with you in this fight.
Men videoda bir
there's
so'zdi. Bu yerda uchdan so'zni qisqacha.
Something to be understood from what we are living here this morning. There are leaders here. There are people with experience and knowledge which have been through a lot.
Men intayin xushal bir faoliyatdan qaytib keldim. Bu yil Berlinda o'tkazilgan xalqaro Uyg'ur haftaligi shaxsan qatnashmaganligimdan afsuslanman. Ammo sizlarga qo'llash so'zini yo'llash fursatiga erishganligimda intayin xushalman. Bu qo'llash faqat mening shaxsiy nomim emas, balki Angliyadagi Uyg'urlar va Tibetlarning asosiy kishilik huquqlarini qo'llaydigan nurg'un kishilar nomidanmi aytilyotdi. Biz Xitoy kontroli qarshisidagi rayonlarda yashayotgan Uyg'urlar va Tibetlarning asosiy kishilik huquqlarini qo'llaymiz.
Indifference not being heard. And this is something that has to be rapidly achieved. Children work. You know, we could be nice and do like if Western countries were clean and fighting this way to do things by the Chinese regime.
Bu hakikaten bir qiyin davr. Bugun biz oldin farz qilg'ili bo'lmaydigan bir Amerika prezidenti bor. Bu Amerikaning ilgari Amerikaning ilgari astoydil muomala qilib kelgan ba'zi masalalarga, jumladan kishilik huquq masalalariga bo'lgan qiziqishni yo'qotgandek ko'rindi. Yana bir tarafda Vladimir Putin bor. Uning harakati numussiz va degudek psixik bir shaklda bo'lyotdi. Buning natijasida Xitoy hukumati tunji qatam xalqaro shahrida bu 3 hokimiyat ishida eng muhim, eng kuchli ko'rinayotgandek tuyuldi. Ammo bu faqat sirtqi ko'rinish. Ular ishki jihatda aslo muhim emas. Chunki ular barliq osonlik millatlarni atalmish mal markazli tuzumga singdirib Xitoyni bir xilli kimlikka aylantirishga bel bog'lagandek. Buning bilan kishilarning eng asosiy huquqlari yo'qotilmoqda. O'zi xohlagan diniy e'tiqod huquqi, o'z manfaatini saqlash huquqi, o'z kimlik yashash huquqi degandek huquqlar yo'qolmoqda. Shunga bunday bir vaziyatda haqiqatni tushunadigan kishilarning o'rnidan turishi intayin muhim. Biz Uyg'urlarni uchun ovoz chiqarishimiz kerak. Biz Tibetliklar uchun ovoz chiqarishimiz kerak. Birdan da bu minbar o'tkazlar qiliqida intayin qo'shaman. Sizlarga zo'r muvaffaqiyat tilayman va shuni ashta chaqanlarki, sizlar Angliyada doim bir do'stinglar bor. Rahmat.
Canadian trade strategy is basically built upon car making and oil and gas, which is not the cleanest way to deal with the planetary issues, even if we all have our issues with that and we don't share or the same point of view about oil and gas. But United States have a bill against children work. It does say that if a cargo is to enter the country, those who import have to prove that there's no child work involved in the supply chain. And it seems to work. A lot of ships are just returned.
Amanlar xeyliksə, mən tünügünmü və bir neçə minut bilgirimi oxşaş bir fikirni anladım. Bu buluşma birlik hərəkət qilish, həmkarlaşış, dostluq doğru bərpa qilish toğrusidagi fikir idi. Bugün ətigən bu yerdə görgənlərimdən düşünüşümüz kerak bo'lgan eng muhim narsa shuki, sizlarning ittifoqdoshlaringlar bor, sizlarning do'stlaringlar bor. Va ular bu yo'lda sizlar bilan birga mengishga bel bog'lagan. Bugun әtigən biz bu yerda ko'rganlarimizning hammasi ma'nosini bilamiz shu. Bu yerda rahbarlar bor, bu yerda tajribasi bor kishilar bor, bu yerda bilim va tushunchaga ega kishilar bor. Va ular bu sinoqlarni vaqtning o'tishi bilan o'z boshidan kechirgan kishilardir.
Returned out of thousands, because the bill is bluntly ineffective and knowingly ineffective and purposefully ineffective. Canada did not want to turn over ships coming from China. Through the world presently, Canadian government is seen as something like a gentle hero. He's so nice. And we have to make our opinion about what Canada does through its actions, not words. And we have many issues.
Biz ba'zida o'zimizni yaxshi va axloqli deb qarashimiz mumkin. Biz g'arb davlatlarining bu masalaga qanday muomala tutganligini ko'ramiz. Ammo Xitoy hokimiyatining usuli qarab boqaylik. Ular bu ishda butunlay boshqacha muomala qilyapti. Bizning davlatlarimizmi mukammal emas. Masalan, Kanada iqtisodining bir qismi avtomobil sanoati, neft va tabiiy gazga tayanadi. Bular yer shari duch kelayotgan muhim masalalarni hal qilishdagi eng pokiz yo'llar emas. Bu vaqtda har birimizning o'xshamagan qarashlari bo'lishi mumkin. Ammo shunday bo'lsa-mu, Amerikada bolalar emgakka qarshi bir qonun bor. Bu qonun shuni belgilaydiki, agar bir mol mulk yoki yuk Amerika bozoriga kirgizilmoqchi bo'lsa, uni import qiluvchilar shuni isbotlash kerakki, bu mollar to'g'ri yo'l bilan kirgan mollardir.
But 2 days before, the same Canadian Prime Minister had made a deal with China. And this deal with China included the import of 49,000 China-made cars. And we all believe, and it's pretty well documented, that those Chinese cars do
gather data Qarmoqqa bir yaxshi sistemdek ko'rindi, ammo amaliy natijaga qaraganda nihoyatda oz sondagi mol to'shig'uvchi paroxodlar qaytarilgan. Bu vaqtda sonliq ma'lumotlarga qaraganda minglagan yuklar ichida nihoyatda oz bir qismlar to'xtatilgan yoki qaytarilgan. Chunki bu qonun amaliyotda unumsizdir. Ochiqni aytganda, u unumsiz bo'lish uchun loyihalankandek ko'rindi. Ve bu ölümsüzlük hem bilinip durduğun hem maqsadlik holda mavjud qoldirilgan. Kanada hukumati Xitoydan kelgan mallarni keng ko'lamda tutishni xohlamadi. Shunga biz faqat hukumatlarning go'zal so'zlariga qarab baho bermasligimiz kerak. Hozir Kanada hukumati nurg'un kishilarga nihoyat muloyim, nihoyat niyatli va nihoyat yaxshi niyatli odamdek ko'rinishi mumkin. Ammo biz davlatni uning so'zlariga qarab emas, harakatlariga qarab
this
bağlışımız
so
gerek.
gentle prime minister did not sign the deal because he was getting closer and closer with China, because China is rich, because China is a very important market. So we decided to do something with that, and we tabled our own bill by the Bloc Québécois, which is basically a copy of the US bill against child work. Maybe there might come also a bill from the Canadian government, but I have doubts because it would go against everything they have done in the last year. So you will have to look to Canada through different lenses, through what Canada does. I'm not supportive of the idea of dealing with our internal affairs on the world stage, but this is a very important example. We have to separate what we say and what we do, and you have to judge countries through what they do and not what they say. So in the coming weeks, we should have an answer about the commitment of Canada about child work in supply chains, and Bloc Québécois will always be on your side. Thank you.
Çünkü bizge şundaq daim şunda deyildi. Biz Xitoyga öz yolunu o'zgartirishni aytdik. Biz bu masalalarni ko'tirdi, o'tirib qo'ydik. Biz ularni ayirib etmay, suhbat orqali o'zgartirishga tirishyapmiz. Ammo amaliyotga qaragan bo'lsak, boshqa bir manzurani ko'ramiz. Masalan, Iran 2-3 kun ilgari Kanada bosh ministri Xitoy bilan bir savdo kelishimini imzolagan. Bu kelishimning ichida Xitoyda ishlab chiqarilgan avtomobillarni import qilish mazmuni bor edi. Biz nurg'un kishilar shuni eshitdimizki va bu vaqtda xili ko'p dalillar bor. Xitoyda ishlab chiqarilgan bu mahsulotlarning ba'zilari majburiy emgak bilan munosabatli ta'minlash zanjiridan keldi. Shunga bu yerdagi masala shuki, agar bir hukumat kishilik huquq haqida so'zlab turib, shuning bilan bir vaqtda Xitoy bilan texnik cho'ng savdo munosabatlarini kengaytirayotgan bo'lsa, undaq so'z bilan amaliyotning o'tirishida farq bor degan. Menimcha to'g'ri yo'l shu bo'ladiki, bosh ministr bunday kelishimni imzolamaslik kerak edi. U bu kelishimni imzolamagan bo'lsa, bu texnik kuchli bir siyosiy signal bo'ladi. Chunki shu vaqtda hukumat Xitoyga borgan sari yiqilish. Bu vaqt bunda agar aksiya bo'lganda
How have these
Hökumət
practices
Xitayga
evolved
bağlanışını
in
yıkılışıp
recent years in
gitip atıdı.
response to international scrutiny, particularly through mechanisms that you have described in your research, such as labor transfer programs and other systems that might try to obscure this coercion?
Well, thank you. Important question. We often like to flatter ourselves a little bit about the impact that we can actually make about policies on the ground. I was told by one Uyghur who was able to escape the region that some of this work has been able to force the Chinese government to render the practices more subtle, to try to hide them better, to try to change the trajectory in the region. To what extent this is true is hard to say. But one thing we can say for sure is that when Chen Quanguo, who in the previous panel we heard a little bit about, came to Xinjiang from Tibet in 2016, he initiated a dramatic campaign of mass internment as a catalyst also not only to effect mass internment, but to affect a whole range of other related policies and to accelerate them much more dramatically. And one of them, of course, was forced labor transfers, which have always been harder to conceptualize because labor transfer is a policy
Şuna
that
biz bu
has
mesele doğrusida bir
benefited
iş
a lot
qilishni
of
qaror
Han-Chinese,
qildik ve biz
generally in the
ve
region who
haqiqatan
tried
harakat etdik.
to move from the
Biz
countryside to
Buluk
cities to
Kübek
get out of
nomidan
agriculture
özümüzün
to get
kanun
factory
layihəsini
jobs. But in
parlamentga
ethnic
sunduk.
minority
Bu kanun
regions,
layihəsi asasən
particularly, of course, in
Amerikadakı
the Uyghur
Amerikanın ballar
homelands, but
əmgəkiga
also in
qarşı
Tibet,
qanunun bir nüsxəsi idi.
labor transfers
Bəlkə
have
gələcəkdə
become
Kanada hökuməti
what
bunun
we
oxşar
can
bir
now
qanun layihəsini
basically
ortaya qoyuş
refer
mümkün.
to as the
Amma
largest
mən
system
bununla
of
ança
state
işənməyəm.
imposed forced labor in
Çünki
the
bu
world.
onların yaxınqı bir yıl içində
When Chen
qılıb gələn
Quanguo
nurgun
ended his
işlərə
reign,
zid keldi.
after 5
Şuna
years,
sizlər
according to
Kanadaga
what we can
başqaça bir
understand,
gözünlər
was
bilan
more or
qarşılamak
less a
gerek.
predetermined
Kanadani
blueprint and plan with
Kanadani
some leeway, I
onun
think,
şöyle
for
qarab emas.
contingencies,
Belki
but he
hareketi qarab
implemented it
görüşünlər gerek.
successfully from
Belki
the
onun kılgan
perspective of
işlərə
Beijing.
qarab
When he
bağlışınlar
concluded his
gerek.
5 years at the end of
Mən adətdə
2021,
öz
and his
dövlətimizin
successor, Ma
içki
Xinray,
işlərini
took over,
xalqara şəklində
it was
münazirə qilishini
clear
yoqturmayman.
that the
Amma
policy
bu məsələ
trajectory
nəhayət
was
mühim bir
shifting
misal.
towards a normalization of the situation.
Biz söz
No more
bilan
dramatic
əməliyyatni ayırıb
campaign
görüşni
style,
öyrənişimiz
trying
kerak
to
və sizlər dövlətlərə
shift
baha
Uyghurs from
bergəndə
camps
ularning nima deganligiga
into
emas,
the
nima
formal prison
qilganliklariga
system,
qarab baho berishinglar kerak. Shunga
trying to
kilar bir necha
establish what
hafta
Xi
ichida
Jinping had called the
Kanadaning
rule
ta'minlash
of law,
zanjiridagi
or
ballar
better,
əmgəkiga
rule
qarshi
by
turish
law,
masalasida qanchalik astoydil
a system
ekanligini
of oppression
haqida
that
javobini
has
ko'ramiz.
become
Bizning partiyamiz bo'lsa,
overt,
men
less
partiyamiz bo'lsa,
visible,
bu masalada
but at the
doim
same
sizlarning
time, I
yaninglarda
think we
turdi.
can argue has
Rahmat.
become more penetrative. It has re-entrenched its control of the grassroots. And this, I think, is precisely how we can understand the contemporary evolution of labor transfers as a system of oppression and of forced coerced mobilization and job placement that has become less visible, more normalized, and has focused also on retention policies, the policy of retaining Uyghurs in the region. Now, just last year, in the middle of 2025, we had another change in Xinjiang with the onset of the replacement of Ma Xinray by Chen Xiaojiang. Chen Xiaojiang, the new party secretary, who has a very strong background now, whereas Ma Xinray was much more focused on economic development. He was a technocrat from Guangdong with experience in developmental policies. Chen Xiaojiang's background is in party discipline. It's in ideological control, united front work, and ethnic affairs. And we see a resurgence of the importance of ethnic unity. We see greater talk about security, which always was number one, but now there's no doubt that it is the priority and everything else.
Xalqaraning nazorati va diqqatini bo'libmi sizning keng tadqiqotingizda bayon qilgan emgak o'tkash planlari va boshqa o'xshash sistemlar orqali yurishtirmoqchi bo'layotgan majburlash xarakterli siyosatlarni oshkorlash jihatida qanchalik ta'sir ko'rsatdi. Men Michael oldi bilan meni bu munozaraga taklif qilganlarga ko'p rahmat. Shunaqla bu faoliyatni tashkillaganlarga rahmat. Bu nəhayət çoğ və intayin mühim bir sual. Bəzida biz özümüzdən bu yerdəki siyasətlərə törtüləydiğən təsirimizni sal artdıqca bağlab qoymuş. Ammo rayondan qochib chiqqan muvafiq bo'lgan bir Uyg'ur menga shundoq degan edi. Huquqiy tadqiqotlar va xalqaro boshimlar Xitoy hukumatini ba'zi siyosatlarini texmo yushirin shaklda yo'l qo'yishga majbur qilgan. Ular o'z qilmishlarini texmo yaxshi yushirishga tirishgan. Ba'zi jihatlarda rayondagi siyosatlarning yo'nalishini o'zgartirishga majbur bo'lgan. Buning qanchalik darajada rost ekanligini aniq bekitish qiyin, ammo biz ishonch bilan aytoladigan bir ish bor. 2016-yili oldingi muzokarada tilga olingan Chunchanggo Tibetdan Xinjiangga o'tkazilgandan keyin u keng ko'lamda tutqun qilish harakatini boshlagan edi. Bu harakat faqat keng ko'lamdagi lager sistemini qurish bilanla cheklanib qolmadi. U yana boshqa nurg'un munosabatlik siyosatlarning yo'l qo'yilishiga turtki bo'ldi. Shundaqla bu siyosatlarning suratini va ko'lamini ko'rinarli oshirdi. Bularning ichida eng muhimlari albatta majburiy emgak o'tkazish planlari edi.
Thank you, Dr. Zenz, for the informative intervention. I would just like to pass now to Dr. Laura Murphy. Dr. Murphy is a human rights professor.
Majburiy emgak o'tkazish siyosatini tushundirish va uning mohiyatini anglatish hamisha texmo qiyin bo'lib keldi. Chunki emgak o'tkazish siyosatini sharqqa qaraganda odatdagi ishga o'rlashtirish yoki iqtisodiy taraqqiyot programmasida ko'rinishi mumkin. Buning uchun biz siyosatlarning bugungi shaklda qanday o'zgarganligini texmo cho'nqur tushunishimiz kerak. Xitoy hukumati yerli qatlamlardagi kontrolni yana kuchaytirdi. Bu bizga emgak o'tkazish siyosatini bugungi taraqqiyotni tushunishimizga yordam berdi. Bu hozir bir xil bostirish sistemasi va majburiy safarbarlik, majburiy ishqillashtirish mexanizmiga aylandi. Ammo u ilgariga qaraganda texmo ko'rinmas holga keldi. Texmo normal va odatdagi siyosatda ko'rsatilgan bo'ldi. Buning bilan bir vaqtda diqqat nuqtasi saqlash siyosatiga qaratildi. Ya'ni Uyg'urlar rayonining ichida saqlab qolish, Uyg'urlarni rayonning ichida saqlab qolish va ularning yetkazishini va ijtimoiy erkinlikni kontrol qilish siyosati. O'tgan yilda, ya'ni 2025-yilning o'rtalarida Xinjiangning yana bir muhim o'zgarish yuz berdi. Mashhuriy o'rniga Chinshaodong tayinlandi. Yangi rahbarning orqa ko'rinishi intayin diqqat qo'zg'aydi. Mashhuriy asosan iqtisodiy taraqqiyot ahamiyat bergan bir texnokrat edi. U Guangdongdan kelgan bo'lib, taraqqiyot va iqtisodiy idoralarda tajribasi bor edi. Ammo yangi rahbarning orqa ko'rinishi butunlay boshqacha. Bu partiya intizomiy ideologiya kontrol birlashmasi xizmati va millat ishlari sohasidan kelgan. Biz hozir uningki Millatlar İttifaqlığı degan hukumning qaytadan texmo muhim o'ringa chiqayotganligini ko'ryapmiz. Bexatarlik masalasi haqida so'zlarimiz texnik ko'paydi. Amaliyotda bexatarlik ilgirimi muhim o'rinda edi. Ammo bugungi kunda shu narsa aniqki, bexatarlik hozir hamma narsaning ustida turdi. Boshqa barliq siyosatlar va nishonlar shuningga bo'ysundirilgan.
How widespread it is, and how deeply rooted it is in our supply chains. And without your efforts, the whole world, I think, would be still back in 2016 without the kinds of laws like the UFLPA and others that are on the horizon. It was your work that actually served to help workers all over the world to gain their rights, not just those in the Uyghur region, but those all over the world, to gain their rights and have their voices heard, and to have legislation address them. And so what's happening right now is there is this sea change where governments are trying to figure out what can we do to understand forced labor in China and elsewhere in the world. What tools can we use, as you say? Can we use traceability tools? Can we use corporate documents? Can we be on the ground in some countries to better understand what's going on?
Bu jarayonlarga texmo ko'p qatnashish talab qilinmoqda. Shuning bilan bir vaqtda emgak va yetkash programmalariga qatnashish nisbatini oshirishga zo'r ahamiyat berilyapti. Rahmat.
Canada and Mexico have laws as well.
Endi keyingi so'zlovchimiz doktor Lauri Murphyning tunishtirishiga keyingi so'zlovchimiz doktor Lauri Murphy.
And even when I
Doktor
was in office, we
Munbiri
weren't doing
kishilik huquq
nearly as much as I
professori va
wanted to.
tadqiqotchi bo'lib, zamonaviy
But
qulluq va majburiy emgak masalalarida masalalar
real
bo'yicha
sea
mutaxassis.
change on the
U
horizon.
Joe Biden hukumat davrida Amerika
Right now
ichki
we've got the
bexatarlik
US and
ministrligining
Mexico,
maslahatchisi
Canada with
bo'lib
laws
xizmat
in
qilgan.
place.
U emgak
El
qonunlarining
Salvador,
ijro qilinish
Indonesia, and
xizmat guruhi
Pakistan just
bilan
adopted
hamkorlashgan.
new
Uning
forced
asosiy
labor
vazifalari
import laws
biri
that will ban,
Uyg'ur majburiy
we
emgakni
hope,
oldini olish
goods
qonuni
made in the Uyghur region from
yo'l
entering
qo'yish
into
va
those
ijro
countries.
qilishga yordam berish bo'lgan.
13 more countries have promised the
Dr.
United
Muri,
States that
qani,
they'll do
so'zlang.
that. If we count all of the states of the EU, that's 27 states. That's more than 50 countries. That's more than a quarter of the world's countries are on the precipice of having these laws, and I think we'll see even more. And so, and I really mean it when I say this is because of the emphasis you all made on what was happening in the Uyghur region. People fought for this for decades, and the horrors of what's going on in the Uyghur region helped people to understand we had to have a world change, and we're seeing that happen now. There are a lot of things we can say about how to make that more effective, how to get more countries involved in passing these kinds of laws, and we can do that later in the questions. But I want to emphasize that it's collaboration between the Uyghur community and other communities of workers that will make this actually the most effective laws, both for the Uyghurs and for
Javobgarlik va hisob berish masalasi nihoyat muhim. Ishlarni
managing
to'liq
director of the
tushunilmagan
Association
bo'ladi.
of Ethic
Ishlarning tekshiriqlar bo'lmagan bo'lsa,
Shareholders,
menimcha
an
butun dunyo
organization
hozirmi
monitoring
2016
activities of
yildagi
major
tushunch
German
saviyasida
stock
to'xtab qolgan
corporations
bo'ladi.
and representing
Biz Uyg'ur majburiy emgakni oldini olish
88,000
qonuniga
retail
o'xshash
shareholders.
qonunlarga
Mr. Massa,
yoki
still on
hozir
the
yo'l
topic
qo'yilayotgan
of the
boshqa
EU forced
tashabbuslarga
regulation
erishilmagan
law,
bo'ladi.
resolution.
Bularning
By
hammasi
the
ishlarning
end of
qismlarning
2020
natijasi.
by the end of
Ishlarning
2027,
tadqiqotlar va
this
tirikchiliklarning
regulation
dunyoning
prohibit any
har qaysi
product
joylardagi ishchilarning o'z
theoretically
huquqlarini
linked to
qo'lga
Uyghur forced
keltirishiga
labor
yordam
at any
berdi.
stage of the supply
Buning
chain
uchun
from
sizlarga ko'p
entering the
rahmat.
EU market. What concrete steps should companies and shareholders take to verify the supply chains, and how can civil society help these measures are effectively implemented?
Well, first of all, I also would like to emphasize what Laura Murphy just said. It's all about implementation, because what we can see, or it would be a test to see if the upcoming EU regulation would be effective, if we have a situation similar to what we have seen 2 or 3 years ago, when really Volkswagen had problems selling their Porsches and Volkswagen to the United States because they could not prove that there was no technology used in those cars not made of Uyghur forced labor.
Bu faqat Uyg'urlarga emas, balki dunyodagi barliq ishchilarning o'z huquqlarini qo'lga keltirishga, ovozini olishga va ularning masalalarini hal qilgan qonunlarning maydonga kelishiga yordam berdi. Hozir biz bir cho'ng o'zgarish davrini boshdan kechiryapmiz. Dunyodagi hukumatlar shu savol ustida izlanyapti. Xitoy va boshqa joylardagi majburiy emgakni tushunish va unga taqobil turish uchun biz nima qilaymiz, qanday qurollarni ishlatalaymiz, ta'minlash zanjirini o'z qo'llash texnikalaridan foydalanamiz. Korxonalar hujjatlarni tekshirish orqali paket topa olamiz. Ba'zi davlatlarda naq maydonda ishlab va vaziyatni texmo yaxshi tushunamiz. Bu savollar hozir jiddiy muzokara qilayotgan masalalar. Meksikmi bu sohada qonunlarni yo'l qo'ymoqda. Yana boshqa nurg'un davlatlarmi o'xshash va'dalarni berdi. Hozir dunyo davlatlarining zo'r bir qismi ta'minlash zanjiridagi majburiy emgakka qarshi qonunlarni yo'l qo'ygan bosqichga yaqinlashdi. Menimcha kelgusida bunday qonunlar texmo ko'paydi va men buni rostla demoqchiman. Buning hammasi ishlarning Uyg'ur ishlarning mamlakatlarda yuz berayotgan ishlarni dunyoga tutish uchun qilgan tirikchiliklarning natijasi. Kishilar bu masala uchun necha yil kurash qildi. Ishlarning davlatlarda yuz berayotgan dahshatli voqealar dunyoga bir narsani tushuntirdi. Dunyo miqyosida bir o'zgarish tuzum o'zgarishi zarur edi. Biz dal shu o'zgarishning yuz berayotganligini ko'ryapmiz. Albatta bu qonunlarni qanday qilib texnik unumli qilish, texnik ko'p davlatlarni bunda qonunlarni yo'l qo'yish, qabul qilishga, qanday jalb qilish qatorliq masalalar haqida ko'p narsa deyilmaymiz. Bular keyingi savol-javob bosqichida muzokara qilishga bo'ldi. Ammo men bir nuqtani alohida ta'kidlamoqchi, Uyg'ur jamiyati bilan dunyodagi boshqa ishchi xizmatchilar jamiyatlarining hamkorligi va bu qonunlarning haqiqiy unum berishidagi eng muhim omildir. Bunda hamkorlik faqat Uyg'urlar uchun emas.
Take a look into how especially the international cotton supply chains work. They are mixing all of it, so there is no guarantee that a label such as the Better Cotton Initiative really does work and ensure the way it's intended to be. And this is somewhere where we should focus and emphasize in the future, really make sure that it's not about this audit industry, which is basically just, okay, what does the West, what does Europe, what does German company wants is some audits and certificates. Okay, then let's give them these certificates and audits. And this is also what the Chinese government has done. Yeah, let's do them audits. That's what we have seen with Volkswagen, the Urumqi.
Bir savol paydo bo'ldi. Savol so'radi. Qaraqanchilar va paychaklar ta'minlash zanjirini tekshirishlar uchun qanday amaliy xizmatlarni qilish kerak? Shunaqla fuqarolar jamiyati bu tadbirlarni unumli ijro qilishga qanday yordam beradi? Bunga javob berildi. Javob Aldı bilan men bu Laura Murbi xon bilan ozroq ilgari aytgan bir nuqtani ta'kidlayman. Eng muhimi ijro qilishdir. Chunki biz kelgusidagi Yevropa Ittifoqining belgilari va boshqa qonunlarning qanchalik unum bo'lganligini dal ularning qanday ijro qilinishiga qarab baho beramiz. Buning siniqi biz bir necha yil burun ko'rgan edik. Masalan, 2 yil ilgari Volkswagen ig'ir qiyinchilik duch kelgan. Ular Amerika bozorida o'zlarining Porsche, Volkswagen markali avtomobillarini sotish masalasiga yo'liqqan. Chunki ular muhim bir masalani isbotlamay qolgan edi. Bu avtomobillarning
reported, I think in early this year, that 13.75 million instances of labor transfer have been recorded in the Uyghur region between 2021 and 2025. How should the United
Xalqara
Nations
xalqaro paxta ta'minlash zanjirida har xil manbalardan kelgan paxtalar bir-biriga aralashtirildi. Shunga yaxshiroq paxta tashabbusiga o'xshash belgilarning haqiqatan o'z ko'zida tutgan maqsadni amalga oshirganligini to'liq kafolat qilish nihoyat qiyin. Menimcha biz kelgusida alohida diqqat qilishimiz kerak bo'lgan nuqtalarning biri shu. Biz faqat tekshirish kasbiga tayanib qolmasligimiz kerak. Chunki ko'p hollarda bunday sistema mundaq ishlaydi. G'arb nimni xohlaydi, Yevropa nimni xohlaydi. Germaniya qaraqalari nimni xohlaydi. Ular faqat bir qancha tekshirish doklati va guvohnomalarni xohlaydi. Undaqda ularga shu guvohnomalarni va shu doklatlarni berib deyli. Bunun bilan ish tugaganda ko'rsatildi. Xitoy hukumatimi dal shu usulni qo'llanib kelyapti. Ular guvohnomalar xohlaydi ekan, undaqda guvohnoma berib deyli. Ular tekshirish doklati xohlaydi ekan, undaqda doklat tayyorlab berib deyli. Degan yo'l bilan ish qildi. Ammo bu haqiqiy masalani hal qilmaydi. Biz buni Volkswagen va boshqa bir qancha xil ahvollarda ko'rib bo'ldik. Faqat qog'oz yuzidagi guvohnoma va doklatlarning o'zlari yetarli emas. Biz haqiqiy mustaqil ve ishonchli tekshirish mexanizmlariga muhtoj. Rahmat.
But human rights, labor rights, and markets are not fundamentally in tension, and it's critical that we're able to make the case to states that forced labor, slavery, and other human rights concerns are issues of international normative standards and issues of humanity that we should all care about, but also issues within the markets that touch on other states, and that there is also a market case to be made for responding effectively as a coordinated international community to some of these issues. And that feels somewhat cynical to be making a case around markets.
Siz BDT'nin zamani qulluqning har xil shakllari bo'yicha alohida doktorchisi bo'lib nomzod ko'rsatilishdan burun sizning oldingi vazifa tugachuningiz bu yilning boshida bir doktor e'lon qildi. Uyg'ur rayonida 13 milyon 752 mingdan ortiq emgak o'tkazish ahvoli xotirlanganligini bildirgan edi. Bu nihoyat zo'r son. Undaqda BDT va xalqaro jamiyat bundaq kishilar huquq masalalariga qanday taqabul turish kerak? Bu masalalarni xalqaro seviyada qanday texnik unumli ko'tarib chiqishga bo'ldi va kishilik huquq masalalarini xalqaro sistem ichida qanday texnik kuchlik ilgari surg'ili bo'ldi.
First is obviously the universality of these human rights and labor rights norms. And critically, when it comes to issues that may rise to the level of slavery, and this is an issue that has been put on the table, of course, by my predecessor, Professor Tomoyo Obokata, in the context of Uyghur forced labor systems, that this is not an issue that is internal, that the prohibition of slavery and international norm carries what we call obligations erga omnes. And that means every single state in the international system has an obligation to cooperate to bring the violations to an end. That states cannot claim that issue that exists within another state's borders, that all states have that fundamental obligation. Second, of course, that it is an issue of international security and
Ig'ir kishilik huquq dafsanjishlari faqat axloqiy yoki qonuniy masala emas. Ular sog'lom va odil bozor iqtisodiga zarar yetkazadigan omillardir. Shunga kishilik huquqni qo'llash bilan iqtisod taraqqiyotni ilgari surish bir-biriga qarshi turmaydi. Aksincha, ular bir-birini kuchaytiradi va qo'llaydi.
Secondly, around advocating for higher coordination and harmonization across states. There is a high risk that if only a handful of states, even if we get up to the level of a quarter, which is incredible progress, if only a group of states is responding, then there remains a risk both in other state contexts but also through those state contexts and back into the states where those protections exist. So international harmonization of the response is critical, and for that leveraging solidarity also with other movements. We're often thinking in these contexts about states like the UK, the US, member states of the EU, and not thinking so critically about the diversionary markets through which forced labor goods may move when regulations are more strictly enforced. And so building solidarity movements with those other states that may be diversionary markets is also
Bulupmu ma'lum bir ahvolning qulluq darajasiga yetish mumkin bo'lgan masalalarga kelganda bu texnik muhimdir. Bu dal hozir xalqaro seviyada muzokara qilinayotgan masalalarning biri. Mening oldingi vazifa o'taguvchim professor Tomoya Obokata Uyg'ur rayonidagi vazifani bog'laganda bu masalani nihoyat aniq o'tirib qo'ygan edi. U Uyg'ur rayonidagi sistemlarning qulluqqa munosabatlik xalqaro o'lchamlar nuqtasidan tekshirilishi kerakligini ta'kidlagan. Bu yerda eng muhim nuqta shuki, qulluqni cheklash faqat bir davlatning ichki ishi emas. Qulluqni cheklash xalqaro qonunning eng asosiy qoidalaridan biridir. Bu qoidada xalqaro qonunda erga 15 deb atalgan majburiy emgakni o'z ichiga olgan. Buning ma'nosi shuki, dunyodagi har bir davlatning qulluqqa qarshi turish majburiyati bor. Bu faqat ziyonkashlikka uchraganlar yoki munosabatlik davlatlarga tava masala emas. Bu barliq hukumat, barliq davlatlarning o'rtaq masalasidir.
Rethink their strategies to more effectively address these programs?
Yes, I'll address part of the question. The rationale behind labor transfers in ethnic regions are political control. They are a way to integrate ethnic communities into the Chinese Communist Party-led social order. They are a way of re-engineering these societies, taking Uyghurs, Tibetans, and in some other fringe regions of Western China, dismantling ethnic community and integrating the sort of political watchword is modernization, but what it does is it transfers them, even if it's local, it transfers them into a factory park or in an agglomeration of factories or into Han majority regions within these provinces, or it transfers them to other provinces. And
Biz dövlətlər arasındakı texmo yuqori bir dərəcədəki maslaşış və siyasətlərini bir-biriga uyg'unlashtirishni ilgari surishimiz kerak. Chunki nihoyatda cho'ng bir xavf bor. Agar faqat oz sondagi davlatlarla harakatga o'tsa, ham hatto bu son dunyo davlatlarining 4dan 1ga yetib qolsimi, bu albatta nihoyatda zo'r ilgirlash bo'ladi. Yana masala to'liq bo'lmaydi. Hal bo'lmaydi. Chunki faqat bir guruh davlatlarla inkas qaytargan ahvolda majburiy emgak bilan munosabatli mahsulotlar boshqa davlatlar orqali aylanib o'tish yo'lini topalaydi. Bu xavf faqat boshqa davlatlarning o'zida mavjud bo'lib qolmaydi. Balki shu davlatlar orqali qaytadan majburiy emgakka qarshi qo'llash tadbirlari bor. Davlatlarning bozorig'iga kirib qilishi mumkin. Shunga xalqaro saviyada javoblarni va siyosatlarni moslashtirish intayin muhim. Bu nuqtada biz ittifoqlik kuchidan foydalanishimiz kerak. Boshqa kishilik huquq va emgak huquqi harakatlari bilan hamkorlashishimiz kerak. Biz ko'pincha vaqtda Angliya, Amerika, Yevropa ittifoqiga a'zo davlatlarni o'ylaymiz. Ammo majburiy emgak mahsulotlarini qanday qilib boshqa bozorlarga yo'tkazilganligiga yetarli diqqat qilmaymiz. Agar ba'zi davlatlarda qonunlar qattiq ijro qilinsa, bu mahsulotlar boshqa nazorat ojiz bo'lgan bozorlarga o'tkazilishi mumkin. Shunga biz texmo keng doiralik xalqaro hamkorlik va ittifoqlik to'g'ri qurishimiz kerak. Riyosatchi rahmat, bu nihoyatda kuchli va mazmunli javob bo'ldi. Biz nurg'un muhim fikrlarni oldik.
It's very much a system that's dominated by the state, and neither companies nor the workers can resist this. So we've had to create a different strategy, and at first, when people were fighting the Uyghur cause, there was a great emphasis on moving into human rights bodies to try to
biz bu programlarga texmo o'limlik taqobil turish uchun strategiyamizni qaytadan o'ylab chiqishimiz kerak. Men bu savollarga bir qismini javob beray. Rayonlardagi emgak o'tkazish siyosatlarining orqasidagi asli sabab siyosiy kontroldir. Bu siyosatlarning milliy jamiyatlarni Xitoy Kommunistik partiyasi rahbarlik qilgan ijtimoiy tuzumga solishning bir vositasidir. Ular buni jamiyatni qayta qurib chiqish, qayta tiklantirishning bir quroli sifatida ishlatadi. Uyg'urlarni, Tibetliklarni va Xitoyning g'arbiy rayonidagi boshqa millatlarni nishon qilib, ular aslidagi millat jamiyat qurilmasini parchalaydi. Ondan ularni yangi bir siyosiy ijtimoiy tuzumga solishga urindi. Buning uchun ishlatilgan siyosiy shuar zamonlashtirish deb ataldi. Ammo amaliyotda yuz berayotgani boshqa. Ular kishilarni o'z jamiyatidan ayirib, mayli yerlik doirada bo'lsin yoki boshqa joylarda bo'lsin, zavod rayonlariga, sanoat bag'ishlariga yoki ko'p sonda zavodlar to'plangan sanoat markazlariga o'tkazdi. Ba'zi ahvollarda ularni shu o'liklarning ichidagi Xitoylar ko'p son egallaydigan rayonlarga o'tkazdi. Bu orqali kishilarning oila, mahalla va milliy jamiyat bilan bo'lgan bog'lanishni ojizlashtirib, ularni partiyani kontrol qilgan yangi ijtimoiy muhitga singdirishni maqsad qildi.
And we must do it together. But I think one important point I want to make is that right now we have the opportunity to get an international system in place where countries do actually have import bans, but they're all afraid of it looking like it's a move against China. They're all afraid of looking like they're doing it because of Uyghur forced labor. So on the one hand, we need to keep our voices loud, but we need to do it in collaboration with people around the world who are fighting against forced labor, so that we can say this is not just about China. It is very much about China, we know it, but it is also about workers in Malaysia and workers in Zimbabwe and workers in Chile, and we can have that coalition of people who care about this issue, so that we can say it's not just about China, but it is about China, right? I absolutely
Biz bu programlarga texnik o'limni taqobil qilish uchun strategiyamizni qaytadan ko'zdan kechirishimiz kerak.
Thinking about forced labor import bans and market bans, we're predominantly thinking about goods, products and commodities, but there is another piece of this puzzle that has received perhaps slightly less attention, which is around investment, around where money is allowed to go and who is allowed to invest in various spaces. And so also leveraging a serious conversation about responsibility in the context of international investments and how we build a more robust system governing international investments is also really critical because the money is also flowing into and from forced labor systems.
Çünkü günde bunu əmələn düşünüşümüz kerak. Əmələn düşünüş kerak. Bunu faqat bir iqtisadi yoki iş qulaytırıq programması deb qarashqa bo'lmaydi. Masalan, Volkswagen o'xshash shirkatlarni o'ylab boqamiz. Bundaq sharoitda ishchilarning o'zlari qarshi, ishchilarning o'zlarining qarshi tura olishi nihoyat qiyin. Shunga biz boshqacha bir strategiya qurishga majbur bo'ldik. Dastlabki vaqtlarda Uyg'ur masalasi uchun kurash qilganlarning ko'pincha kishilik huquq organlari va xalqaro mexanizmlarga tayanishga zo'r ahamiyat bergan. Ularning hukumatlarni harakatga keltirish va xalqaro organlarning bisimidan foydalanishga kirishdi. Bu yanada muhim. Biz bu qurollarni davomli ishlatishimiz kerak. Va buni birlikda foydalanishimiz kerak. Ammo men bu yerda bir muhim nuqtani alohida ta'kidlayman.
Then it becomes somehow, at least at first sight, more difficult, at least to investors, because they say, oh, international raw material supply chain, it's so hard to cover them, it's the transparency, no one knows. But that does not mean that we cannot do anything, because if you really look into some supply chains, it's not so hard at all to trace those where raw materials are coming from. And maybe two examples where we can then also align with other international struggles. First, I'd like to mention the Sudanese civil society struggle to recognize what's going on in Sudan right now as a genocide. And that's the symmetries here, because also a lot of raw materials, especially gold, is part of the German kind of supply chain, especially Volkswagen. And this is why next week at the Volkswagen shareholder meeting we will also ask about the accountability regarding the gold supply chain from Sudan, but also trying to make them again recognize their responsibility, but also accountability, but also supporting the cause of the Sudanese civil society to recognize and make more public what's going on in Sudan.
Malayziyalik ishchilar, Zimbabvedagi ishchilar, Chilidagi ishchilar va dunyoning boshqa yerlaridagi ishchilarning huquqiga munosabatlik. Shunga biz bu masalalarga ko'ngil bo'lgan keng bir ittifoq qura olishimiz kerak. Shunday bo'lganda bu faqat Xitoy haqidagi masala emas, ammo shuning bilan bir vaqtda Xitoy haqqında məsələ deb aytılmayız. Yəni bu yerdə faqat nuqul Xitayning şanqılığını emas, dünyadakı şu məcburi əmgəkninki müzənkət kütüyotqan insanlarga qartılğan məsələ deb aytılmayız.
The struggle for human rights and labor rights is also for those Chinese workers working right now in these Serbian copper mines.
Bu yerda yana bir muhim nuqta bor. Biz ko'pincha vaqtlarda tovarlar, mahsulotlar va xomashyolar haqida so'zlaymiz. Ammo bu masalaning yana bir qismi borki, u yetarli diqqat qaratolmaydi. Bu bo'lsa mablag' solish masalasidir. Ya'ni pulning qayerga bir chiqib qo'yilganligi va kimning qanday shaharlarga mablag' solishga ruxsat qilinganligi masalasi. Shunga biz xalqaro masalalar, xalqaro mablag' solish sohasida javobgarlik va mas'uliyat haqida texnik astoydil muzokara olib berishimiz kerak. Çünki bu xalqaro sistemning muhim bir qismi. Majburiy emgak va kishilik huquq dafsandachiligiga tegishli sohalarga mablag'ning qanday eqayotganligini nazorat qilish zarur.
Thank you for your answer. I think it resonates with has been one of the biggest messages of this forum, which is the interconnectedness between all these struggles around the world today. Another question that I'd like to make is, in your recent research, have you identified particular industries that have become more exposed to the use of Uyghur forced labor in their supply chains, especially sectors that were not
Agar biz so'z erkinligi bo'lmagan, mustaqil nazorat mexanizmi mavjud bo'lmagan va xom ashyo ta'minlash zanjiri intayin murakkab bo'lgan bir muhitda ish qo'ygan bo'lsak, undaqda bu ish bo'libmi mablag' sag'ishtirgan nisbatan dastlabda nihoyat qiyin ko'rilishi mumkin. Chunki ular bunda deydi. Bu xalqarалық xom ashyo ta'minlash zanjiri ekan. Uni biz qo'g'lash pek tez. Oshkorlash yetarli emas. Hech kim to'liq hech kim to'liq bilmaydi. Ammo biz hech nima qilolmaymiz deganlik emas. Chunki ba'zi ta'minlash zanjirlarini cho'nqurroq tekshirib baqsangizlar, ular biz qo'g'lash o'ylagandek unchalik qiyin emas. Ba'zi hollarda ta'minlash zanjirining qayerdan boshlanib, qayerga borganligini bir qadar aniq ko'rgan bo'ldi. Shunga biz bu masalaga amaliy va nishonli usulda qarashimiz kerak. Masalan, Sudan, Malayziya, Zimbabvega o'xshash davlatlardagi ba'zi ta'minlash zanjirlarini ko'rsatishga bo'ldi. Bular biz masalaning qanday ishlaydiganligini tushunish uchun muhim misollarni beradi. Bo'libmi qizil mayliqlar va konchilik sohasi nihoyat muhim. Chunki hozir dunyodagi to'qinishlar va kishilik huquq masalalari dal bu soha bilan zich munosabatlik. Bugungi kunda konchilik, xom ashyo boyligiga munosabatlik ta'minlash zanjirlari tang talab-tortishlik va eng xavfli sohalardagi bir masala bo'lib qoldi.
They're investing in green hydrogen technology. They're investing in all kinds of oil and gas derivatives. They're investing in anything that you can use, like any kind of plastics or really dirty industries or manufacturing where they can use coal that is the heart and center of the region as the energy source, and then call it green technology, or call it a circular economy, or use some of these new buzzwords for climate
diqqatimizni faqat bir guruhga markazlashtirib qilmasligimiz kerak. Biz dunyoning har qaysilardagi ishlar duch kelayotgan ahvollarga qarashimiz kerak. Chunki bu masalalarning orqasida doim o'xshash bir masala ko'rindi. Kishilik huquq va emgak huquqini dafsanda qilish, bu xil qonunga xiloflik qilish va huquq dafsandlikni oshkorlash va uningga qarshi turish bizning o'rtaq mas'uliyatimizdir.
Those industries, particularly in chemicals, plastics, and future materials that are dirty. They're also talking about graphite and graphene. They're talking about critical minerals, exploration and mining.
Bu faqat Xitoyning masalasi emas. Bunda ahvollar boshqa joylarda ham yuz berib turadi. Shunga bu masalalarning o'zaro bog'lanishini tushunish nihoyat muhim. Bu biz bugun muzokara qilayotgan muhim nuqtalardan biri. Rahmat javobingiz uchun. Menimcha sizning deganlaringiz bu munbarning eng muhim uchurlarining biri bilan nihoyat mos keldi. Ya'ni bugungi dunyodagi bu xil kurashlarning hammasi bir-biri bilan zich bog'langan. Ularni ayrim holda tushunish mumkin emas. Men so'ramoqchi bo'lgan bir savol bor. Sizning yaqin tadqiqotingizda Uyg'ur majburiy emgak sistemasi bilan texnik ko'p bog'lanishga ega bo'lib qolgan alohida kasb yoki sanoat sohalarini bayqadinglarmi? Bo'libmi ilgariki bu masala bilan munosabat yo'q deb qaralib kelgan, ammo hozir Uyg'ur majburiy emgak ta'minlash zanjirining ta'siriga uchraganligi ko'rilayotgan sohalar bormi?
For agriculture, we don't just want to produce the tomatoes or the peppers. We want to make the industrial products, and then we want to brand them too, and even move further high value into like cosmetics, into food additives, into more fancy value-added production. So the vertical integration through value-added production, a lot of that continues to be labor-intensive. And then, as we've heard, the moving of some of these industries from eastern China to Xinjiang because of cheaper labor cost, but also cheaper energy. A lot of production in Xinjiang is more cost-effective because of the energy and the lack of environmental protection. Although that supposedly is gonna, well, there's a lot of green initiatives, including green mining is one of my favorites, but all of this goes hand in glove with the intensification of the labor transfer and vocational skills training system, where a lot of government language complains about the lack of skill of labor mashg'ulotlari,
Uyghur sanoatlar, muhitga zo'r ta'sir ko'rsatadigan ishlab chiqarish sohalari va boshqa
what was predominantly focused on low high labor
ularning ko'pincha xom ashyo va sanoat materiallari bilan munosabatli. Ular yana grafik ve grafinga zo'r ahamiyat bermoqda. Shundoqla strategiyalik muhim qizil boyliqlar izlash, qizish va etish sohalariga zo'r kuch sarf qilmoqda. Bu sohalar kelgusidagi sanoat va texnik taraqqiyot uchun intayin muhim qaralmoqda. Yana bir muhim soha dehqonchilikdir. Ularning nishoni faqat pomidor yoki qaramash qatorliq dehqonchilik mahsulotlarini ishlab chiqarish uchun emas, ular bu mahsulotlarni sanoat mahsulotlariga aylantirishni xohlaydi. Bundan keyin ular bu mahsulotlarni o'z markalari bilan bozorga qilishni maqsad qildi. Hatto texnik yuqori qimmat qo'shilgan sohalarga kirishni nishon qilmoqda. Masalan, girim buyumlari, yemeklik xurujlari, alohida ishlab ishlangan iste'mol mahsulotlari qatorliq yuqori qimmat qo'shilgan ishlab chiqarish sohalariga kengayishni xohlaydi. Boshqa chiqib aytganda, ular faqat xom ashyo ishlab chiqarish bilan to'xtab qolmay, butun qimmat zanjirini kontrol qilishga va texmo yuqori foydalanilgan bosqichlarga o'tashga tirishyapti.
Forced labour violations, that the ability to target international financial flows through sanctions regimes is an important piece of that puzzle, because where we target the money, the response follows.
Yes, maybe to add, well, sanctions is one thing, and it may appear now stronger than what we have seen with other human rights due diligence regulations and rules before, because those rules better apply for contexts in countries where there is democracy, freedom of speech, and so on, because it really relies that those victims of human rights violations can speak out for themselves and use internal complaint mechanism, official state complaint mechanism, as the German government has now. But
vertical integration,
to be honest, if we would now go with the
ham
victim of
ashyodan
Uyghur forced
tartib
labor to the
og'riqqa
German
mas'uliyatchi
authority
bo'lgan
and
butun
filing
qimmat
an official
zanjirlarini
complaint,
kontrol qilish
the
va
response
qo'shilma
probably would,
qimmat yaratilgan
well,
ishlab chiqarishni
can you prove that you're really
muhim o'rinda tutadi. Bu ishlab chiqarishning zo'r bir qismi hozirmi emgak kuchiga ko'p tayinlagan sohalardir. Biz anlaganimizdek ba'zi sanoat sohalari sohalari Xitoyning sharqiy qismidan Uyg'ur rayoniga o'tkazilmoqda. Buning sababi faqat arzon ishchilik kuchlar balki energiya tannarxining tuvan bo'lishidir. Sizlarning davlatlar nurg'un ishlab chiqarish turlari texmo arzonga tushadi. Chunki u yerda energiya bahasi tuvan, shundaqla muhit asrash belgilarimi ojiz yoki yetarli ijro qilinmayotidi. Garchi hozir yeşil taraqqiyot, yeşil korxonchilik qatorliq nurg'un tashabbuslar o'ttirilgan qo'yilgan bo'lsa-mu, men ba'zida bunday atalg'ularga sal gumon bilan qaragan bo'ldim. Chunki amaliyotda bularning ko'pincha emgak o'tkazish siyosatining kuchaytirilishi va atalmish kasbiy tarbiyalash yoki kasbiy o'qitish programlarining kengaytirilishi bilan bir vaqtda ilib bormoqda. Boshqa vaqtda bu iqtisodiy va sanoat taraqqiyot siyosatlari bilan emgak kontrol qilish sistemasi bir-biriga zich bog'langan. Ular birlikda ilgari surilmoqda.
A dual-sided coin, and that it's really critical that we are speaking out and responding against retaliative sanctions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the intervention of our panelists. It was an excellent panel and really gave us a lot of food for thought for our own advocacy work and for the advocacy work of our colleagues in civil society. Just want to then direct everyone for the coffee break and for the 2 round tables that we'll have at 11:30.
Good. Good morning, everyone. Great to have everybody here to address an issue that continues to evolve, transnational repression. My name is Dean Baxendale, and we're here with a very distinguished panel, and my co-host, Miriam, on the other end. There's a thorn and a rose on the panel here. I won't let you can figure out who that might be at the two bookends here. But first of all, welcome and to Berlin and to our talk today about transnational repression and its evolving faces. So I want to just open up on some of the themes that have already been discussed. So, as we gather here, with different peoples, different cultures, with different causes, but all unify. Uyghurs, Tibetans, Hong Kongers, Falun Dafa practitioners, democracy advocates, human rights defenders. Our struggle is not separate. Our struggle is one. And what unites us all in the face of the common threat, which is authoritarian regimes, we have teamed and learned from them, from one another, that if we cooperate with each other, we can fight the totalitarian regimes. They will not silence the dissent beyond their borders, which is their goal. The Chinese Communist Party did not invent transnational oppression, as you all know, but it has refined it on a global model. Surveillance, intimidation, digital monitoring, harassment of family members, economic coercion, abuses of legal systems, threats against journalists and publishers like myself, activists, scholars, and business leaders living in democratic countries. These tactics are now being copied and shared amongst the authoritarian governments around the world. Freedom House has documented how authoritarian states increasingly collaborate across borders to target critics abroad, creating a growing international network of repression. This is no longer only a Chinese problem. It is a democratic world problem. The same playbook being used against the Uyghurs is being used once again against journalists, publishers, politicians. The same surveillance methods used against Hong Kong activists are being used against dissidents from Russia, Iran, and elsewhere. The same threats directed at Tibetan advocates are being directed at human rights defenders. They are stronger when we work together, so we must be stronger still. We must build the united front for freedom, because the CCP and other authoritarian actors want us divided ethnically, by religion, by nationality, and because they see the Uyghurs and their cause as the single threat now that they must eradicate. Tibetans speaking only for Tibetans, Hong Kongers speaking only for Hong Kong. When they isolate the communities, they can intimidate us one and all. And our answers must be solidarity. So in closing, the opening, I just want to speak to the key things that everyone in this room is working towards. And what is the basis of what we're doing? It's truth. It's human dignity. And it's our collective strength. And we refuse to surrender our freedoms. If we stand together, they cannot isolate us. If we stand together, they cannot silence us. And if we stand together, freedom will prevail. So now let's get on to our panel and have a great discussion about transnational repression. So thank you and welcome. Miriam?
Thank you, Dean. Continuing in this spirit, I would suppose we jump right into it. Just a quick note, unfortunately, unlike announced, Hayur Kurban cannot be with us on this panel today. So we do not have the Uyghur perspective sitting with us on the panel, but since TNR is a global issue and China does use similar tactics to target communities worldwide, I'm pretty sure we will have an almost full picture here on the panel. And I'm really sure it will be very insightful. I'm really happy to welcome with us Basma Mostafa, Tenzin Zöchbauer, Barbara Lochbieler, and Natasiri Bergman. Happy to have you here. And I will quickly run us through what we can expect in the next 80 minutes or so. Since TNR is not a new issue. I suppose everyone in this room knows more or less what we're talking about. We will not use much time on definitions, but really move to what is changing, how are tactics evolving, how is scale changing, and so on. And from there, we will look at what is happening at the international and institutional level to counter TNR, and also where we still see gaps. And then we want to spend most time of this discussion today on solutions. What can be done, what maybe is already happening, and where does civil society, where do diaspora communities, but also their allies need to put the finger to actually, make change happen. We will make sure there's enough time for your questions at the end. There will be a Q&A session, so if questions come up during the discussion, please hold on to them, note them down, and we'll open up the room after the discussion here. Jumping right into it, I would first like to ask you, Tenzin, you and your engagement with Tibet advocacy dates back many years. Also, the organization you work for, or you're leading today, Tibet Initiative Germany, was founded in 1989, if I'm not mistaken. So that makes it one of the oldest organizations working on Chinese repression in Germany. Also, under your leadership, the Tibet Initiative co-founded the coalition against TNR in Germany. So you really have broad expertise on this topic, and drawing on your personal and your organization's experience with TNR in Germany. What would you say has concretely changed in recent years when it comes to the intensity of TNR, the tactics, and also how institutions here in Germany, but also in Europe, are reacting to it?
Shall I? Oh, yeah. Is this one? Okay. Thank you very much, Miriam. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm super grateful to be here, and I'm feeling very honored that I'm actually always invited by my Uyghurs friends to come to all the events here in Germany. So it feels like somehow being part of the community already, and also seeing friends here. So yeah. In general, I think transnational repression is for all of us, for our communities, Uyghur communities and the Tibetan community, nothing new. We grew up with this. It is something we experience since decades. We experience it in every country where Tibetans and Uyghurs have escaped from China, and we experience it since decades. So what definitely has changed is the awareness of TNR, that it is taken seriously by the host countries we are living in, that people are raising awareness, and that the tactics of transnational repressions are being more addressed by policymakers and institutions. So we are naming it, we are recognizing it, and now we are also shaming these tactics. And I feel like this is something which is very, very important, and a great step forward, which has changed within the last few years. And I would like to highlight that, especially here in Germany, seeing the success we have seen within the last year, and I think we will come back to this later, is the result of the work what civil society have been doing here. And we have to say very clearly that one of the first organizations who started raising awareness on transnational repression here in Germany was the World Uyghur Congress, together with the Tibet Initiative Germany and the organization Freedom for Hong Kong. So end of 2021, we were sitting together, at end of 2022, we were sitting together, drafted the first briefing on TNR, and went into the German Bundestag, and we had dozens of meetings explaining what TNR is, from the simple level to the very complex level. And the first reactions we received were a little bit harsh sometimes very understanding, sometimes a little bit confusing. But we saw that there is an opportunity and a willingness to listen to it because the time shifted. And from the perspective of national sovereignty, it was and is a very important topic for Germany as well. And I think speaking before, listening to all the talks we heard before about a strategic cooperation and collaboration between different organizations, this is a great example of how this actually really can work well and achieve something if we stick together and move forward together in one point. So we started in 2023. In 2024, we formed a coalition against transnational repression in Germany with organizations from a lot of different countries. Basma is here as well from Egypt. We have over 20 organizations and we exchange. And so it is not only raising awareness within the civil society of Germany, but also within our own communities to understand what are we facing actually and what are the impacts. Because I feel like all of us are so busy every day thinking and advocating for our countries, Tibet, Hong Kong, Uzbekistan, and probably sometimes we don't have enough time to actually understand what kind of impact all the pressure we are facing because of this work has on us. We heard before the story, the situation of Rushan Abbas. I think her story is something which touches everyone, but it's not an individual case. It's something which happens to a lot, and probably a lot of stories and cases we don't even know because people don't dare to speak about it. So yeah, thinking about what has changed, this I would say is something what we can see. There are developments coming, but I hope we are just at the beginning and there will more to be continued.
Thank you very much. Just a quick follow-up question. You were already on the what has changed for those reacting to it, so those being targeted, but do you also see change in the tactics used in TNR by authoritarian states?
Yeah, sorry. Regarding the tactics, yes. I mean, many of us, I would say, I would like to speak mostly about the tactics from China, what we know and what we experience. And what we heard so far is that the Chinese tactics in the most of the times is quite subtle. And I think a very broad thing is that you don't really know when the tactics will affect you or your family members. It is very randomly chosen. It feels sometimes it's randomly chosen which people get a visa to visit Tibet and which persons suddenly don't get one. Why do some people can be publicly active and doesn't get any threats and others very quickly. And from the tactics, we can see that it definitely shifted very much from the direct harassment to the online and digital areas. So within the digital world right now, it makes it quite easy, especially for China, and we all of us know China is on the technological side very experienced and very fast forward. We can see that these tactics, doxing, stalking, smear campaigns, this is happening often, and it makes it difficult to actually understand or see where it comes from. We can assume that maybe some Chinese bots are behind it, or maybe China is behind this digital harassment, but it's most of the time really hard to prove it. And so this new tactic on digital level makes it hard. What I heard and what really frustrates me is knowing that a lot of people just feel intimidated and feel like being affected by TNR because of the technical things they are using, because a lot of our techniques are made in China, and it's easy for Chinese, or it's quite easy if they want to actually get on our phones, withdraw the data, get in our contact dates. So phishing is something a lot of us are probably already experienced, and in that sense it also gives within the community a big feeling of mistrust, because all of us know that our data, our pictures, our informations are not really safe at the moment.
Efendim bugün Gayri Kurban efendim bugün biz bilen yığındı bulamaydı. Şuna bu sahnede Uygurlarning nuqta nazarga vakillik qilgan bir so'zligi yo'q. Ammo davlat alqagan boshtirish siyosiy butun dunyo munosabatlik bir masala bo'lganligi uchun va Xitoy hukumati o'xshash usullarni ishlatib dunyoning har qaysi joylaridagi bexatarlik jamiyatlarini nishon qo'yganligi uchun menimcha bu sahnadagi muzokaralar orqali masalaning asosan to'liq bir qismini to'liq bir ko'rinishni olaymiz va bu muzokaraning nihoyatda tushunchlik va foydali bo'lganligiga ishonaman. Bugun biz bilan birga bo'lgan birimiz Basma Mustafa, Tenzin, Baba va NATO Sheti Bigman. Xush keldinglar. Sizlarni bu yerga ko'rganligimdan intayin xursandlik his qilaman o'zimni. Hamda keyingi taxminan 80 minut ichida nimalarni muzokara qilganligimizni haqida qisqacha tanishtirib o'tay.
Is or has been held in Oman just days after giving birth, facing deportation to Egypt. Can you tell us a little bit about what is happening in this case? And yeah, I think I'll hand over to you first.
Thank you, Mariam, for the introduction, and thank you, Tencent, for this light insight about what's the change over the past years. And at the outset, I would like first to stand in solidarity with Uyghurs people and with all those who continue to endure repression, both inside China or in exile. And I would like, if you allow me, before to jump to Mariam case, it's important to understand the border context in Egypt that has made TNR not only possible but also systematic. Because over the past decade,
Devlet alqagan boshtirish yangi bir masala emas. Meningcha bu yerdagi ko'pchilik bizning nima haqida so'zlayotganligimizni asosan bildi. Shunga biz atalg'ularning aniqlanishiga ko'p vaqt sarf qilmaymiz. Balki bevosita eng muhim savollarga o'tamiz. Nima o'zgaryapti? Bu boshtirish usullari qanday taraqqiyotyapti? Ularning ko'lami va ta'sir doirasi qanday kengayapti degan masalalarni muzokara qilamiz. Undan keyin bu masalaga qarshi turish uchun xalqaro va organ saviyada nimalarni qilayotganligimizga qarab chiqamiz. Shundaqla hozircha qanday bo'shliqlar va yetarliliklarning mavjud ekanligini muzokara qilamiz. Ammo bugungi muzokaramizning ko'p vaqtini hal qilish choralariga ajratishni xohlaymiz. Ya'ni nima qilib bo'ldi, qanday ishlarni qilib qanday ishlarni ilib bağlı buldu. Fuqarolar jamiyati, muhojiratdagi jamiyatlar va ularning ittifoqdoshlari qayerda texmo ko'p kuch sarf qilinish kerak, qanday qilganda haqiqiy o'zgarish yuz bergili bo'ldi degan savollarga javob izlaymiz. Biz oxirida ishlarning savollar uchun yetarli vaqt qoldirishga tirishamiz. Shunga muzokaraning oxirida savol-javob bosqichi bo'ldi. Rahmat.
Her activities were limited to a peaceful online engagement, including participating and supporting a digital voting, calling for political change, including the removal of dictatorship Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. And this voting become in days widely spread and reached to 2 million votes. And in response to this, Egyptian security first limited access to this voting online. And then
agar muzokara jarayonida savollar tug'ilib qolsa, ularni asos saqlab turinglar va yozinglar. Muzokara qilishgandan keyin zanlı sual cevap açımız.
They hacked the,
Endi bevosita
they
muzokara
hacked the
kirayli.
pages
Oldi bilan
and know
Tinjin
who's
efendimden sormoqchiman.
behind
Sizning Tibet
all
masalasi
of this
bo'yicha
activity.
faoliyatingiz va advokatligingiz
And because
nurg'un
Maryam,
va qilayotgan ishlaringiz
Bosita
nurg'un
was
illohga
one
so'zlagan.
of the admin,
Siz bugun
and,
rahbarlik qilayotgan
because
tashkilot
she
Tibet
based
tashabbusi
in
Germaniya Tibet
Oman,
tashabbus jamiyati
this is
xatolashmasam
make her, easy
1989
target
yili
for the
qurilgan.
Egyptian regime.
Bu uni Germaniyada
So,
Xitoyning bostirish shirkatlariga qarshi xizmat qilayotgan eng qadimiy
in
tashkilotlarning
March,
eng burungi tashkilotlarning biriga
2026, her husband was
biri bo'ldi.
arrested in Oman
Shundaqla sizning
based
rahbarligingizda
on,
Tibet tashabbusi
false claim
Germaniyadagi Tibet
and,
tashabbus jamiyati
Almani authority
Germaniyadagi
refused
davlat
to
alqagan
show the
bostirishga
family,
qarshi
any written documentation about
bir
this
birlik
Red Bull,
harakat
notes.
qurg'uvchi a'zolardan biri
And in
bo'ldi.
April,
Shunga
he was
sizning bu
forcibly
sohadagi bu sohada
deported to
tajribangiz
Egypt
bor.
after being
Sizning shaxsiy tajribangizga va
misplaced and,
tashkilotlarning Germaniyadagi
by
davlat
Omani
alqagan
authority,
bostirish
and
bilan
they
bo'lgan
told
uzun
him,
yillik
they
tajribasiga
gaslighting him
tayanib
and
so'ramoqchiman.
told him that he
Yaqin
back
kunlarda nima o'zgardi?
to his home
Konkret qilib
in
aytganda,
Moscow
davlat
to his
alqagan
family,
bostirishning
and
kuchlik
then
darajasida
they
qanday
bring
o'zgarishlar
him
bo'ldi?
to
Ishlatilgan
the
usul va
airport,
taktiklar
and,
qanday taraf
he
qildi?
was able
Germaniya va
to
Yevropalik
make a phone
organlar
call
bu
to
masalaga
his
qanday
wife
inkas
to
qaytirdi?
let
Ularning
her
tunishi va
know
inkasida
that
qanday
he
o'zgarishlar
is
bo'ldi?
being deported now to Egypt, and since then his whereabouts is unknown. On 15 April, Maryam, while she heavily pregnant in the 8 months, attempt to leave Oman with her 2 young children, 4 age and 2 age.
Meryem sizga ko'p rahmat. Meni bu yerga taklif qilinganga ko'p rahmat aytaman. Bu yerda bo'lganligimdan ham xushalman. O'zimni sharaf his qilaman. Rostimni aytsam, men doim Uyg'ur do'stlarining Germaniyadagi faoliyatlariga taklif qilindim. Ba'zida o'zimni go'yo bu jamiyatning bir a'zosidek his qilaman. Bu yerda nurg'un do'stlarning ko'rishdimmi, o'zimni xursandlik his qilaman. Umum jihat aytganda, davlat bostirish davlat alqagan bostirish siyosati biz uchun, ya'ni Uyg'ur va Tibet jamiyatlari uchun yangi bir masala emas. Biz buning bilan o'sib cho'ng bo'ldik. Biz bir necha 10 yildan buyon boshdan ko'chirib kelayotgan bir reallik. Tibetliklar, Uyg'urlar va Xitoydan qochib chiqqan har qanday davlatda buni boshdan ko'chirib keldi.
And this is actually raised a concern about
Ammo o'zgargan bo'yin bir narsa bor. U bo'lsa-mu davlat alqagan bostirish siyosati haqidagi ong va tunishning o'zgarishidir. Hozir biz yashayotgan davlatlar bu masalani texmi astoydil qabul qilishga boshladi. Kishilar bu haqda texmi ko'p so'zlayotdi. Ong tunish texmi keng tarqalmoqda. Davlat alqagan bostirishning taktiklari va usullari siyosat tuzuvchilar va organlarning diqqatini tortishga boshladi. Biz hozir buni atayapmiz, buni e'tirof qilyapmiz va bu xil taktikalarni oshkora qilyapmiz. Menimcha bu bir muhim bir ilgilish. Bu yaqinqi bir necha yilda yuz bergan eng zo'r o'zgarishlarning biri. Men alohida holda Germaniyaning yaqinqi bir necha yil ichida ko'rgan muvaffaqiyatlarni ta'kidlab o'tmoqchiman.
After 10 days, but her situation remained extremely vulnerable, extremely difficult, because right now there is a new baby without
keyin biz bu haqda yana so'zlaymiz, ammo shuni aniq aytishimiz kerakki, bu muvaffaqiyatlarning asosi fuqarolar jamiyatining xizmatidir. Bu yerda aniq aytish kerak. Germaniyada davlat alqagan bostirish haqidagi ong tunish yaratish boshlagan tunji tashkilotlarning biri. Dunyo Uyg'ur qurultiyi, Tibet tashabbusi, Germaniya Tibet tashabbus jamiyati va Hong Kong uchun erkinlik jamiyati bo'lgan. Mushlar Germaniyada davlat alqagan bostirish siyosati haqida tunji qitim harakat boshlagan tashkilotlarning biri. 2021 yilning oxirida, ondan 2022 yilning oxirida biz bir yerga jam bo'lib, Germaniyadagi davlat alqagan bostirish haqidagi tunji davlat tushuntirish dokladini tayyorladik. Ondan Germaniya parlamentiga Bundestag, Germaniya parlamenti Bundestagga kirdik. Biz o'nlagan uchrashuvlarni o'tkazdik. Ba'zida davlat alqagan bostirish siyosatini eng oddiy saviyada boshlab tushuntirdik. Ba'zida bo'lsa nihoyatda murakkab tafsilotlargacha tushuntirdik. Dastlabki inkaslar oson bo'lmadi. Ba'zida kishilar bizni nihoyatda yaxshi tushundi, ba'zida tushuncha ko'rsatdi, ammo ba'zida inkaslar sal qiyin va gangitgan bo'ldi. Shunday bo'lsa-mu biz bir fursatning barligini ko'rdik. Kishilarning anglashga bo'lgan irodasining barligini his qildik. Chunki vaqt o'zgargan edi va milliy egilik huquqi nuqsatidan qaraganda